Directors meeting. Let's see, first thing is on the agenda here is this meeting is being streamed, live stream on YouTube. It is a hybrid meeting. We have people both online and here in the room, and it will be available for viewing on YouTube. It'll be posted, I guess, within 36 hours of the meeting here. So just a heads up, if you have a phone or personal device that makes noise, if you could silence or turn it off. We want to make sure that everybody can be heard during the meeting and their comments are not covered up by a phone going off or a phone ring. So thank you for that. We'll start off with roll call of the Board of Directors. Chris.
Here.
Ashley.
Here.
Sky.
Here.
Paul.
Here.
Reg.
Here.
Karen.
Here.
Mike. Eric.
Here.
Colin.
Here.
And Sean.
Here.
All right. Those two taken care of. Let's see. Closed and special meetings that have been held. I have three, I guess, two of them here. First meeting, September 23rd, 2024, the Audit Committee meeting at CA headquarters. That committee was attended by Karen Emery, Tim Redmond, Reg Avery, and Paul Rader. Vote to close was 4-0-0, unanimous. Meeting was closed at 7:38, and the meeting ended at 8:46. Reason for closure was HOA Act 11B, 111 I, and IV. Second closed meeting was a meeting of, what is this? Oh, it's the Architectural Resource Committee, I'm sorry. Members present at the Architectural Resource Committee meeting, Deb Bach, Eileen McNamara, Lexi Milani, and Carl McKinney. Let's see, the vote to close was 4-0-0. And the reason for that was HOA Section 11B 111-4 IV, consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation. Risk Management Committee meeting, October 24th, 2024. That was Sean McGinnis, Susan Krabby, Sky Anderson, James Hamilton, and Michael Galieber-Such. That was a unanimous vote for closing. Meeting was closed at 6:35 p.m. Was closed in conjunction with HOA Act 11B 111. 4 parts III and IV, consultation with legal counsel on legal matters, and also consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, board members, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation or business. Thank you for sitting through all of our closed meetings. That's always a heavy lift for me. I hope I did you guys right. So, all right. Next is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Reg and Karen. Thank you.
Looking right at you.
All right. Any discussion of the agenda? Very good. Right to the vote. Chris?
Yes.
Sky?
Yes.
Reg?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Colin?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Ashley?
Yes.
And I vote yes. 10-0-0. Now on to the Columbia update. Sean?
All right, thank you. So we're trying something a little new tonight. We have videos for you, but we've, in the interest of trying to save time, we have one video, and I will give you the talking points over the video so you can watch and listen to me narrate them, which should be interesting. All right, first video. As mentioned in the President's Report this month, our team has put countless hours in the successful transition to our new CRM system, from IT to finance to customer care, to our frontline team at facilities and beyond. This transition has involved and impacted so many people and departments across the organization. In a matter of days, the new CA portal will launch, followed by an upgraded app. The result will be vastly improved experience for anyone who interacts with CA program facilities. All right, next is Spooky Archives Fund. First and foremost, if you don't know them by name, Aaron Berry and Amy Kirby are their dynamic duo who run the Columbia, Maryland Archives. These two lead the charge in preserving the history of our unique community and ensuring that we can all continue to tell the stories of our past in the future. Sometimes this includes things that are a little more lighthearted. In the video tonight, you'll see Aaron checking out the Bleak House Tot Lot. Lastly is the fall events wrap-up. We are deep into this into seasonal changes through CA, along with work in our open space. This is a chance to connect with our community. Halloween weekend has become one of those marquee opportunities to host special events across Columbia and engage with families. This included Halloween-themed public skates at the ice rink, a haunted walk at Hobbit's Glen, the annual Columbia Plein Air event featuring more than 60 artists painting al fresco at Lake Kit and Wild Lake, as well as the favorite Trunk or Treat and the Halloween movie at the lakefront. So that's what we have going on.
All right,
And then
thank you.
I had two other short updates. I think I wanted to have Dan Burns just give you saw the update on the CRM, but he wanted to give just a little more information as the launch is right around the corner. Dan?
It's coming. As Sean said, we've been working on this for a while. We kicked this project off in early 2022, actually. And it's been a long process. The last 13 weeks, there's been thousands of team member hours put in getting this transition ready. We talked about at the last meeting, a lot of the things we do, all that stuff is housed in the system for our members to use and access. It's here. Hopefully you've seen all the great videos and emails with our little airline metaphor. It is taken off on Tuesday morning. When we open up, we will be moving from Spectrum Next Generation to Club Automation. The expectation is that things will work, but with every travel, there's always a little turbulence. So we have a lot of support set up to take care of all of our members as they move into our next member management system. The web portal will launch on Tuesday, and then the following Monday, the app will launch. We're keeping them separate to make sure we move everybody through the process as smoothly as possible. But the team is ready here and willing and able to help the members as we move into the next generation away from the old generation.
All right, thanks, Dan. And one more item, Jeremy Scharfenberg is here. This project has been in the works for a long time, but he wanted to just give an update on the Wild Lake outfall repair.
Good evening. So there's at the end of the board packet, there's just a brief memo that explains a Wild Lake outfall channel stabilization project that's going to be starting next week. This is the third phase of a project to repair a man-made gabion channel that basically connects the Wild Lake Dam with the culverts that run under Little Patuxent Parkway. So this will be about a 3-month project. Again, it starts next week. There's signage out in the community about it. We've actively engaged the Village of Town Center, the Village of Wild Lake to make sure that everybody's fully aware of the project. We just want to make sure that the board was notified as well.
Okay, that's all we have.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for the update, and thank you guys for the specifics on your projects there. All right, next we have is the resident speak out portion of our meeting. Just a couple of quick notes on resident speak out. Individuals will have 3 minutes for their speak out time. Groups will have 5 minutes. I do have a couple of people here that want to speak to the same topic, and I appreciate that. The board appreciates it also. But if you have testimony that is repetitive, please just indicate support of prior stuff just so that we can move the meeting along. We want to hear from everybody, but we don't want to become overly repetitive. So just a heads up for everybody. Welcome all, and we will start. First on our list is Kat Wee. Pardon me. There we go. Hi, good evening.
Hi, I'm Kat Wee. I'm here to speak on behalf of myself and also the voice of all the marginalized people that we call tenants who don't really have the same voting rights as everyone else in CA. The Articles of Incorporation and the covenants of the Wild Lake Community Association allow tenants in Wild Lake Village to be members of the association on the same footing as owners, including the right to vote in the annual election and the right to be counted in the 10% quorum for a valid election. These original documents define who is a tenant, and the definition includes a requirement that the individual provide the association board with proof of their lease by delivering a copy of their lease to the board. The covenants remove the authority to determine membership status from the board and vest this power in the full association through its bylaws. The Wild Lake Village bylaws specify the information to be used to determine membership status. Voters/members list must be compiled from the HOA assessment roll and the list of apartment tenants. The bylaws are silent on how to obtain the names of persons leasing single-family detached townhouses, houses, and condos. The village manager is required by the bylaws to post a voter list before the annual election. Posting the list of eligible voters allows members who have been left off the list to get this error corrected before the election. The village manager is required by the bylaws to post a voter list before the annual election. In the 2024 election, the village manager did not post the list as required, and she required an appointment with her to view it. The list could not be readily viewed by members or candidates. She also refused to allow members of the association to copy the list before or after the date of the election in defiance of the Maryland HOA Act provisions on open records. 4 months after the election, the village manager finally released some of the requested information to a member of the board after repeated open records requests. Apartment tenants were not on the list of eligible voters as required by the bylaws. Instead, the apartment tenant list was substituted by a list of apartment addresses without any names and a demand that tenants prove their right to vote by presenting a physical copy of their lease to the village manager. The voter roll did not contain the name of a single tenant. Tenants were turned away from the polls without recourse. There were no absentee ballots from tenants recorded. Not one vote from a tenant was counted in the election. The complete disenfranchisement of the tenants in the Wild Lake Village must end. The board and manager of the Wild Lake Community Association must comply with the covenants and the bylaws of the association in conducting all future elections. The election chair and the election monitor committee must establish election rules and regulations that follow the governing documents and ensure that the tenants are not second-class members of Wild Lake Village. Information about specific violations and bylaws provisions I'm including in an attachment that I have here. I have 10 copies for each one of the board representatives to have, if I can hand those. And the attachment is there. All these laws were given to us by Maryland law librarians. I am a librarian. I have access to a lot of that information.
Ms.
And
Reed, your time is up.
thank you.
Thank you. Eric,
So,
Ms. Wheat.
I got a question from,
Yes.
so I know in some villages, just presenting a driver's license to show proof of residency is sufficient. Is that not sufficient in this village?
Not in Wild Lake Village. They can get they supposedly can get their lease there the Friday before the election by 4. If they can do it by then I guess on Saturday they'll be able to vote. But they're not being given ballots ahead of time. As a homeowner, a ballot is sent to me. I have 3 ways of voting: day of, online, or by mailing that ballot in. Those are not options for people who rent.
All right, thanks. Eric, just for clarification, the Articles of Incorporation require a lease be presented to the community association.
I was just inquiring what documentation a resident needs to provide at Wild Lake.
A copy of their lease as per the charter, the Articles of Incorporation.
Sky had a question.
Sky.
Kat, I think there's more questions.
Kat, this seems to be a village issue. What is it that you want the CA board to do about this? I don't.
Well, I think we need to look into the fact that several village make it impossible or near impossible for tenants to vote, and this needs to be stopped, and the fact that they're breaking rules. And our chair here is actually, from Wild Lake Village, so he should know very well how this works.
So it's more than one village?
Oh, yes.
And the CA board has the authority to do something about this?
As far as following the law, yes, you guys have that responsibility.
Okay. Ashley, Ms. Wee?
Yep. Hi, Kat. So it's important to me as well that tenants are able to vote in all of the villages, and there are multiple issues across villages in terms of fairness for the elections. But I kind of want to echo what Sky said, that this is a village issue that I don't believe the CA board has authority over. Realistically, going to file a complaint with the AG sounds like the only option, right? And then
of course.
your bylaws would have to be changed through a majority vote. Like, that's a Wild Lake specific issue, just like all of,
The bylaws
Harper's
aren't being
Choice
followed
and stuff.
right now, so
right.
if they were followed, people would be able to vote more easily.
Yeah, so again, I don't really see what Columbia, like what the CA board specifically can do whenever it's the Wild Lake bylaws.
Well, our representative is sitting right here, and he hasn't done anything about this, so that's why I'm here.
I don't think Bill has the authority for that.
All right. Karen?
Yeah, one more question, Kat. I apologize for this. So you're saying that the tenants didn't even get a ballot mailed to them?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. Kate Riley? Hi, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Riley, and I'm here on behalf of Casey Cares. Thank you very much. The Village Environmental Group for King's Contrivance. I'm here to make a plea for deer management to protect our native plants and our forests. So there's a story here about how deer management has become important to a new group of Columbia residents, so bear with me while I explain. This last year, Casey Cares and Wild Lake Cares teamed up to write a grant application to the Chesapeake Bay Trust, specifically to the Community Engagement and Restoration Mini Grant, which is worth $5,000. When we reached out to CA and asked them if they would consider matching those funds if we got the grant, John McCoy and the Sustainability Division agreed to do that. So we did get the grant. And over the course of this past year, Susan Tucker of Wild Lake and I carried out the Columbia Native Shrub Exchange. We used the grant to educate Columbia residents about the importance of native plants, preventing further spread of invasive shrubs into our Columbia open spaces, and creating models of healthy landscaping in every neighborhood. Columbia residents met the challenge, so homeowners in all 10 CA villages took out over 500 invasive shrubs from their yards. Some of them were decades old and huge, and it was very impressive. This fall, homeowners replaced their invasive shrubs with $10,000 worth of native shrubs from our grant. So the Columbia Association and the Outstanding Sustainability Division helped us make this happen, and we appreciate it. So some of the residents who had experience with gardening knew that they were going to have to protect their new native shrubs from deer. They knew they were going to have to cage them, fence them, or spray them. But many of the participants, this was the very first time that they approached gardening, and it came as an unwelcome surprise to them. Because after all, they'd never had to protect their barberry, their burning bush, or their nandina. So it came as a shock to find out how much deer impact the growth of native plants, especially native plants and trees, eating everything 5 feet and under, leaving only the most toxic and inedible invasive plants that fill our landscapes and our forests. So the fact is we have to manage the overpopulation of deer in Columbia open space to support native landscaping, to preserve our forests, and to protect our pollinators, our birds, and our wildlife. So we ask that you, our representatives, allocate the funding necessary in your 2026 sustainability budget to create and implement a deer management plan. We all appreciate the beauty of deer, and we all want to see them very occasionally in our woodlands. But what we don't want are the costly consequences of not managing our overpopulation of deer. This is a high risk of Lyme disease, the dangerous car collisions, the high cost and the high frustration of maintaining a home landscape with constant deer browse, and most of all, the destruction to the health and the future of our forests. We look forward to your action in this.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Any questions? Karen?
Yeah, thank you very much for coming tonight. I totally understand. I actually do enjoy at the end of the summer when the deer eat my hosta. That cleans that up right away. However, I totally understand where you're coming from as I use that Bobex spray. I totally get where you're coming from. When you talk about a deer management plan, what did you have in mind?
The only thing that has been shown to be effective is culling the deer herds. And so we are here to show you that the population of Columbia support this.
Do you think that CA can tackle this problem all by itself, or does it have to be a partnership between the Columbia Association, the county, and the state?
I don't know about the state, but I think it makes a lot of sense to collaborate with the county. But currently, they're only addressing deer on county property, and we want Columbia Association to address the problem on Columbia Association property, open space.
Okay. So, anyone else? I had a quick question.
Yeah.
If you can email that to the board, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, if you could email it. Just a quick follow-up. If we were able to eradicate all the deer in Kings Contrivance for a single year, how many deer would come over from Montgomery County from the reservoir within 2 years? How do we deal with,
Montgomery County also has a deer management
sure, but
issue. And so the bigger problem now is that the deer, when they're fleeing the county sharpshooters and archery people, they're coming into Columbia Association property.
okay, all right. And
So if we're looking, we can always get bigger and bigger, but the more we do, the less that's a problem.
I wanted to ask the question and make sure we got that on the record. And secondly, how many deer are we talking about? How many do you think to effectively cull and manage deer in the county on CA land?
So the ideal number, in order for a forest to be able to regenerate itself, so the saplings aren't all eaten, is between 7 and 15 deer per square mile. And we're looking at now an average in the county of 75, with some areas in Columbia up to 150 per square mile, different times of the season, different locations.
So you're asking for a culling of like 1,000 deer or maybe more?
There are many, many times too many deer.
If we're looking at budget terms, I need to try and figure out what the size of the issue is, so I appreciate it.
Well, this is why somebody needs to start looking at this in Columbia Association to see what's feasible, what can be done.
Right.
Yeah.
And data always is a good starting point, so I appreciate everything you brought to us tonight. Thank you. Oh, Sky has a question, I'm sorry. Kate?
You've talked about a deer management program. Would you be satisfied with hiring a full-time deer specialist or wildlife specialist, which would also attack the fox problem and the raccoon problem, which are totally minuscule compared to the deer situation?
Yeah, I don't see those as problems, but I think hiring a wildlife biologist to start investigating this and figuring out exactly what would need to be done would be a really good first step. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Anybody else? All right. Thank you, Kate. Thanks so much for your testimony. Richard Love? Good evening.
Hi. Thank you. This is a follow-on to Kate's presentation. I hope it's not too repetitive. My name is Richard Love, a longtime resident of Kings Contrivance. I'm active with Casey Cares, Weed Warriors, Watershed Stewards, and most recently started an adopt-a-spot along the CA path by our lot on Yellow Bonnet. This year, my wife, Mary Love, and I installed 2 native gardens on our property at some personal expense, as they were both done by professional garden designers. Our immediate concern was to protect our new plantings from the deer. We have found some success in using a combination of small fencing, deer repellent, trico specifically, which seems to be an effective, although quite expensive deterrent for the deer so far. To date, we haven't lost a single plant to deer because of our diligence and persistence. Currently, our trial and error strategy is working well. However, we realize that ultimately it will be a never-ending battle as the deer population continues to climb. The deer will become accustomed to the taste of the deer spray, or they will become too numerous and too hungry and will eat anything green that is available to them anyway. The only option we may have in the future will be to turn our lot into some kind of caged fortress to keep the ever-growing population of deer out. We have to see how that works out with HOA. Even if we were to go all out and enclose our property using any means possible, like installing 8-foot fencing, this would not address the larger issue of overpopulated deer devastating our open space. In many areas of Columbia, the deer population, as said, is up to 150 per square mile. That's a lot. Deer browsing at this level will prevent our open space and surrounding Patuxent watershed from regenerating. So we are most assuredly seeing a deforested open space in our near future. We homeowners cannot protect our open space with deer sprays, caging, fencing, and more native planting on our lots. To protect our open space and surrounding watershed, we need CA to step up. A quick Google search will show that there are many localities in Howard County, Maryland, and nationally that have successfully implemented deer management plans, even in areas adjacent to residential homes like we have here. In fact, deer management plans in other areas of Maryland, like rural western Maryland, have been so successful that deer populations are dropping to a manageable level there. But deer have now learned that they can seek refuge in our open spaces and residential lawns where effective deer management programs currently don't exist. So my appeal to the CA board is simply this. If other Maryland areas have successfully implemented a deer management plan, it's nothing new. Can CA learn from this experience to devise and implement one of its own? I think CA can and would be able to budget for this effort.
Mr. Love, your time is up. Could you just wrap it up in a final statement for us, please?
I'm confident that you will have the backing of your residents here. I do have some handouts of references, if I could hand that to the assistant here. Thank you.
Yep.
Let me just get this last one. It's for Sky.
Shout out to the representative from Hickory Ridge.
What? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Love? All right, thank you. Thanks again. Next up is Janine Pollock.
Okay, good evening, everybody. To follow up on Richard and Kate's topic, I'm also here to talk about deer management. My name is Janine Pollock, and I am representing Long Reach Cares. If you visit my house, you might think you're at a zoo. For plants. Just about every small tree or plant I have is caged. Obviously not to keep the plants from wandering off, but to protect them from the deer. I've tried everything: terrible smelling sprays, soap hung from branches, fishing line to trip them up, all with varying degrees of success. Several of my neighbors have recently employed devices that emit painful, high-pitched noises and have flashing blue lights. At night, it looks like it's one of the runways at BWI. But wire cages remain the only surefire deer protection. Now, there have always been deer. Why is it such a problem now? For starters, we have removed all the predators. Wolves, bears, mountain lions are no longer keeping the numbers in check. Also, humans don't hunt the deer in the numbers we once did. The population has rebounded from its low in the late 1800s. And we have created the perfect habitat for them. Deer do not want to live deep in a forest, nor can they survive in a big expanse of lawn. But our housing developments, particularly in Columbia, often leave little wooded lots or abut to parks or open space, and this edge habitat is where they thrive. As a result, local deer populations have now exploded. And while the fawns are absolutely adorable and everyone thinks of Bambi, the deer are creating an ecological disaster. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a proponent of native wildlife. Deer are, in fact, native. So what is the issue? The problem is that there is an imbalance. Deer populations are so large, they eat all of the vegetation that is even somewhat palatable to them. And their preference? Native plants. Native plants are the foundation of our local ecosystem. They are the food source for our local insects, which in turn are the food source for larger insects, birds, mammals, and so on. Non-native invasive plants such as Callery pear, Asiatic bittersweet, multiflora rose, aren't palatable, and that's all left alone by the deer. These plants, however, serve no ecological benefit, but they are all that the deer leave behind. Remove the native plants, and you eventually have ecosystem collapse. As a CA weed warrior, I have seen it firsthand, volunteering hundreds of hours in open space to remove invasives and plant natives. It is very rare that I see a baby oak or a small maple tree. CA and the county understand the importance of these areas and have already invested a lot of money not only on plants, but programs to revitalize them. Unfortunately, all of these hours and these dollars are completely in vain if something isn't also done about the deer. Thank you.
All right. We got a question from Eric.
Yeah, there's two ways to approach it. You can approach the symptoms, or you can approach the root cause. And with this amount of deer, I'm not sure approaching the symptoms is going to be good enough.
Yep.
So the question I have is, what is the root cause of this deer explosion, and how do you approach that?
So, like I said, when the colonists first came over, there were like 30 million deer. We actually have about the same number, but you can imagine we have much less space now. Hunting was huge. So in the late 1800s, it got down to about 300,000 deer in all of eastern North America. And they were on the verge of basically being wiped out. But through conservation, things like that, they have come back. But like I said, the problem now is that we've created this habitat and we've removed all the predators. There's nothing really to take the deer down. In fact, if you look at the herds that come through mine, I have a fawn that can't use the back legs because it got hit by a car, but it has access to enough food that it's still surviving. So there's just nothing to cull those numbers naturally. And we've created the problem by removing all those predators and then making this edge habitat, which is where they really thrive. So the only way to do it is for sharpshooters to come in. There have been studies that looked at, catching the females, trying to do something to prevent reproduction. That doesn't work. The only thing that works is to cull the numbers. So we just need to go out there and do it because we're already investing so much money in purchasing native plants, and I mean, CA has given me plants and protection for all of these things, but I can't do that throughout CA, It's my one little area, my adopt-a-spot that I can do.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Reg?
Hey, hi, how are you tonight?
Good.
So, I don't know if you know where I live, but over in Long Reach,
Okay.
I have 2.5 acres.
Okay.
So at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the deers go on parade, and they cut through my area, and they leave me packages all the time.
I'm sure they do.
And they eat all my shrubs and
Yep.
and everything else I have. So what once was a thriving area is now decimated by the deer. But also, didn't the COVID also affected because we were inside and then they started venturing out in greater numbers because they were no longer afraid of us?
I mean, I have a dog. I have an 85-pound dog, and I
I
can
have a
get as
dog, too.
close as I am to these gentlemen. They don't move because they know that I'm not going to let the dog loose. So they're not scared of people. I mean, I've heard of people that put out corn and other things to feed the deer, which also don't help.
Right.
I don't know if there have been studies that showed that COVID had an impact in increasing numbers. I'm not sure. But even without that, I mean, their numbers are continuing. I was talking to Kate earlier. It seems like every year we go, this is the worst year it's ever been. But then next year comes along and it's worse. I mean, I just put in shrubs that typically I have not had deer eat, all the leaves stripped.
Yeah.
If they're hungry enough, they're going to start eating.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I'll just ask a quick question. So I do note that, so I get culling. I totally get it. I'm not disagreeing with that. However, would it be helpful if Columbia had an educational system? My neighbor across the street is part of Yards Alive, which is similar to the CARES groups, and she and I both spray regularly, weekly in the summer and throughout the winter with Bobex, and that does tend to keep the deer out of the yard. Are the CARES groups educating about that? And would it help if CA also?
I think education definitely helps. Because the first response that I get to anytime I bring up the deer is like, oh, they're so cute. They are. But like I said, they're causing problems that are going to be much bigger the longer we let it go. I mean, if you look at the forest, like just the little open space that's right next to my house, I don't have any trees this big. The only ones I have are the ones that I've planted and then caged, so they're bigger. But in the greater open spaces where nobody is actively managing them, there's nothing. So as these 50 to 70-year-old maples and oaks start to come down, there's nothing that's going to repopulate those except for the invasives, which the deer won't eat.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you for your testimony tonight. Ginny Thomas. Welcome back to the board.
Which seat? Hi, my name is Ginny Thomas, Oakland Mills resident, and I'd like to speak about two issues. One is the ability of a resident to speak to the board in a public setting, and two is board policy. In terms of the resident being able to speak to the board, the residents have lost two opportunities. They've gone from 20 resident speak outs to 18 with cutting the two meetings. So that's sad in a way, in terms of you're getting more opportunity to hear issues that affect the residents. The second thing is you eliminated the committees, advisory committees, an ability to actually speak to the board, which I personally thought was a great idea. I learned what they had done and what they were planning on doing. We had to approve that. So it's kind of sad that there's a decrease in the ability of residents to speak in a public setting. I know there are other ways they can do it. Second is board policy. I was curious, since it's been an issue boards have been dealing with for years, as to what are the current board policies. So I went online, I got search thing, board policy, and finally got to that. And then there was a whole thing on pools, regulations for pools, and then they finally got down to board policy. Came down to a couple of things. One is what board policies that have been approved by the board, like significant things like funding for somebody that goes on a trip to the sister cities, how much alcohol money should be spent by CA. Also the 219 plan, that was really important. Then there were a whole bunch of other things, and I think one may have been requested by Bill, fishing regulations for Wild Lake and rules and regs on open space. But that's really operations. That is not policy. And there's a big difference between board policy and staff's regulations or procedures. Staff does not do policy for this organization, in my opinion. And I think there's confusion if you go look at that. Also, there are some dates missing or who actually approved it. But the most significant thing that I found in looking for board policy, in addition to the alcohol beverages and the other stuff that seemed to be more important, I didn't see anything on easement policy under that. And to me, one of the most important things is protecting our open space. So easement should have been there. This board did do one thing, not what I was hoping it would do, but it certainly did a little bit. It still has a long way to go to really guarantee the residents that the open space is protected. But there's nothing there. And then I looked easement policy again, tried another search engine, nothing. So my question for you is, when will the board be dealing with, in a public meeting, because it is policy, I think you have to do it in a public meeting. You can't, it's not operational, it's public policy. When will you be doing that? Okay.
Well, we'll certainly take that under advisement. Just for clarity, I'll jump in really quick. Are there any policies that did you want us to send you the easement policy? Is that what you're saying, or you wanted it on the website?
What I'm saying is there were some lightweight policies listed. But I think you also need to look at what the previous general counsel did for a previous board and gave a book of board policies. And I don't see them all here either. So we seem to be a little confused as an organization as to what policies the board actually passed or didn't. So you may, if you haven't gotten that, you may ask for that so that you need to know all the policies and the public needs to know that the board passed. But easements should be in there, my God.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Excuse me, Sharon Cooper Kerr.
Good evening.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Sharon Cooper Kerr. I've been a proud resident of Columbia, Maryland for 29 years. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of the Wild Lake Community Association. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve in this capacity while being involved in activities, projects, and programs that impact Wild Lake residents in the village. Tonight I'm here to address concerns that were raised during resident speak out at the Columbia Association Board of Directors meeting on October 24th regarding this year's Wild Lake Village Board election. Due to the importance of this issue and ensuring factual information is shared with our community, I felt compelled to testify this evening. During last month's meeting, a Wild Lake resident spoke about the election process in the village and shared that no residents voted in the past election on April 20th, 2024. Just to step away from this for a second, you just heard that said again by the same resident this evening. It is false. We as a village experienced low voter turnout overall during the annual village elections. In Wild Lake, 2,790 households are eligible to vote. This year, 418 residents voted, 5 of whom are tenants in the Wild Lake property. So the fact that none voted is absolutely false. I want to be sure everyone knows that for the record. And as you can see, the voter turnout for our village elections are low at 15% of eligible voters actually participating. Low voter participation is a concern for Wild Lake and many of the community's village elections here in Columbia historically. The Wild Lake Village Board and staff continue to work to engage all of our residents in the election process. Each year, information is mailed to households about the election and candidates forum events are held. This information is included in our weekly e-newsletter, on our website, and also on the Columbia Association's website. The Village of Wild Lake will continue to offer election information activities to ensure residents are aware of their eligibility to participate in this important process. Voters may participate via online voting, absentee ballot, or on-site at Slayton House on Election Day. Our voting guidelines provide that tenants deliver a lease either in person, by mail, or via email prior to the election in order to vote online. Tenants may also bring their lease with them on voting day, and they can vote on-site. A lease is required as we have no way of knowing the names of residents, who is renting where, be it in an apartment complex or an individual home that is being rented by an owner. We do not have that information. We only have information for the actual homeowners, and we get that through SDAT. The Wild Lake guidelines allow for one owner and one tenant to vote in the case where a residence is being rented. And the Wild Lake Community Association thanks this board under the great leadership of Bill Santos for your great work and commitment to our community. We look forward to our continued partnership as we work together to ensure fair and credible elections in the villages of Columbia. Thank you.
Okay. Eric.
So you said that you had 5 tenants that voted out of 400 and something.
That is correct.
So that's 1%. What percentage of the residents in Wild Lake are tenants?
That's a great question. We do not necessarily know that. What we do have is a listing of records of owners who own property here. We also know that some we consider to be absentee because maybe they live outside of that property. But what percentage of those properties are actually being rented at any given point in time, I don't know that. And I don't know how we would know that.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Did I hear you say that tenants can bring their lease on the day of?
That is correct.
Okay.
And some did.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for your remarks tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Sharon Boyes? Oh, Sharon's online. Oh, no. Hi, there you are.
Yeah, but I came anyway.
It's good to see you either way, Sharon.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Nice
welcome to the
see
meeting.
you, as always. Good evening, board members and Mr. McGinnis. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to our community and for this opportunity. I'll just say it, this past week has really made me feel like a stranger living in a strange country. I don't think any of us can say what the future may bring. So as you finalize the budget, I'm asking you for you to not raise the cap on our annual charge. Now is not the time to add more costs to household budgets in this time of such uncertainty. There could be a lot of people out of jobs, and as you all should know, there has been a multi-million-dollar budget surplus for at least the past 2 years, right? So last time, we talked about the Lake Elkhorn Dam, and that dams equal dredging. There's no way around it. And I mentioned that we at Protect Our Streams have asked several times if it would be more cost-effective to own or lease your own dredging equipment. And we still believe this should be taken into serious consideration and investigated before we work on the next budget. I explained a little bit about where sediment comes from, and I was going to continue that discussion moving upstream from the dam this evening, but I was asked a question which led to a discussion about an assessment of Howard County's BMPs in the Elkhorn watershed, which was performed by an independent expert back in early 2023. He visited 29 BMPs, and of the 21 that he was able to assess, he discovered that 43% were in good condition, 33% required maintenance, and 24% were failing. He said, to put it mildly, there are many upland opportunities to enhance the quality of Lake Elkhorn and her tributary streams. How many of you know the county has an obligation to obtain MS4 stormwater pollution credits? And when we perform stormwater projects on RCA land, the county or the SHA get the credits for those projects. And that we have been asked to allow some environmentally destructive projects to take place in our neighborhoods so others can walk away with huge profits and the credits, eventually leaving CA with the mess to take care of for the long term. It's true. I sent all of you guys an email this morning. Did you see it? I emailed you a Green Streets handout. I don't understand why we aren't blistering mad at the county for dumping their polluted runoff into our waterways and then expecting us to make changes on our end so they can get the credits while they aren't mitigating their runoff on their end. They aren't even maintaining all their BMPs apparently due to funding, yet they continue to allow developers to drain and fill in wetlands and remove trees for even more buildings and roads, which just exacerbates the situation. I also sent a link to a climate vulnerability assessment that was performed for CA in 2022. The main takeaway from the assessment was that we were in pretty good shape at that time to weather the storms ahead because of our mature tree canopy, the location of our assets, and I will quote, Columbia's land includes water channels and stream banks with steep slopes. These will contain much of the predicted higher water levels from more intense storms and minimize flooding in most of Columbia. They did note a few locations along the rivers that were more at risk for flooding, and that's kind of a no-brainer. I hope you will find the assessment and the handout to be informative and helpful as we begin to develop our new strategic watershed management and forest management plans. Now more than ever is the time for us to protect what we have and what we value and our values and who we are as a community and why we choose to live here. No one can say with certainty what the future holds, but we've been told what we can expect. And with global warming and species die-off, we need even stronger plans and policies in place that will protect and preserve our green spaces and carbon sinks and protect and preserve our mature trees and multi-layer thick tree canopies as we continue to plant more trees. We must preserve and protect our natural streams and riparian zones. We need to protect and preserve our biodiversity, and we must provide a healthy, safe habitat for our residents and wildlife now and for all future generations to come. It's up to us to set the example for our kids. We can and will get through this, but we must be able to trust in what we're being told And that only happens by being open and transparent and honest with each other. I look forward to working with you on the new plans. Thank you for your consideration. I hope everyone has a happy holiday.
All right. Thank you, Sharon. Any questions? Okay, Mike.
Sure. I'm just really curious. What do you think about culling a bunch of deer? Do you think that's a good idea? And short answer, very short answer, yes or no?
I just knew that was going to get asked. I really just did. It's absolutely true that we really just have too many deer. And as I was listening to the other speak outs, this morning, like I watched a buck and 3 does go right through my backyard and they just hop.
So that's a yes? You think that would be?
For culling deer?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but no, but I have a problem with it in the neighborhoods. I mean, I really think that we need to maybe expand what we're doing on county property and like over at Clark's Farm, you know what I mean? But, I get a little leery about sharpshooters in our neighborhoods, It's
Thank
concerning.
you. Sharon, Sky has a question for
Be a
you.
happy medium somewhere in there, right?
At the beginning of your testimony, you talked about somebody doing a study. And I didn't catch when that was done. And could you tell us who did it? Was it at the request of CA or who paid for that?
Are you talking about the BMP study in the Elkhorn watershed, or are you talking about the climate vulnerability study?
Not the climate vulnerability. That was an assessment.
The first one was done by Richard Klein. He is a nationwide expert. He assesses watersheds, and that was done while the Lake Elkhorn project was still in
And what
play.
year was that, and who paid for that?
Brian England paid for that out of
thank
his
you.
pocket, and it was
Right.
done in early 2023. And there's a report and a YouTube presentation, and had a lot of great information. He worked.
Thank you very
Can we
much.
let the speaker finish? They asked her a question. She has the right
I want to finish that. No, you don't get to just ask and I get to answer half of it. And he worked with Mark Richmond at Howard County, the chief of the Stormwater Management Division, on this. He discussed the BMPs with them, and I have the assessments on each individual one. So
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
All right. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Claudia Allen. Do we have Claudia? There we are. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Claudia Allen. I am one of the members of the Wild Lake Board of Directors, and this testimony that I'm going to share is on behalf of the Board of Directors. It's been brought to our attention both this evening and in your last meeting that there was testimony given regarding the lack of participation from Wild Lake's renters in the 2024 village electoral process. As you have just heard about our process and the numbers regarding renter voter participation from our association executive director, Sharon Cooper Kerr, we share with you all tonight the unfortunate reality that we are seeing in our village a significant decrease in community participation in our electoral process. Due to this decrease in participation from homeowners, we recognize that such a decrease is even more staggering when we consider Wild Lake's renters. The board, from its very first meeting, has committed to a variety of tactics to ensure an increase in voter turnout during our 2025 election. More specifically, the board reviewed our village election process during our fiscal year 2024-25 planning session and deemed it pertinent to hire a lawyer to assist in the review of our bylaws and processes. Most recently, we established the Outreach and Engagement Committee, which has been tasked with sharing information through email campaigns, newsletters, social media, tabling at community events, as well as through the hosting of community programs that encourage meaningful dialogue. In particular, we have been working with Sharon and the association staff to set up meetings with the various apartment complexes in our village. By establishing meaningful partnerships with these buildings, their property managers, and their staff, we believe we will be able to more effectively share information with tenants about our elections, candidates, and programming. We recognize that the impact of many of these efforts will take time, but with the help of amazing staff persons like Sharon Cooper-Kerr, Lexi Milani, and our new events coordinator, Carly Moreni, we are committed to engaging renters and homeowners in all of the efforts and initiatives that make Wild Lake vibrant. As a renter myself, who struggled to get information about our elections, its candidates, and had not received information on how to vote, the barriers spoken of here are just some of the reasons why I joined the Wild Lake Board of Directors. I can confidently say that myself and other members of this year's Board of Directors are committed to ensuring accessibility for all Wild Lake residents throughout our electoral process, particularly during the period of voting. We petition that this body partner with us and with our neighboring villages in efforts to increase awareness and engagement around village elections as a whole. We invite residents who rent and who own to join us at our monthly meetings, and we encourage all interested to assist us in these efforts as we continue working to ensure a vibrant voter turnout in 2025. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you all have a good evening.
All right. We'll go with Sky, then Karen.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi.
You mentioned monthly meetings. Were you talking about the monthly village board meetings?
Yes,
or-
ma'am.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
And just for the record, the individual has come to our monthly board meetings, Ms. Wee, but the document that you have received tonight and the testimony that has been given tonight and in the previous meeting has not been formally shared at a Wild Lake Village Board of Directors resident speak out.
All right. Karen?
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I'm so glad to hear that you're on the village board. So thank you for doing that. And you're a tenant, which is great because we don't have enough tenant representation on our village boards. So you said you yourself found it difficult to vote. And so I would just like to hear like some of the things that you guys are putting in place. I don't want to make this us versus them, but like in Oakland Mills, we just mail our ballots to everyone who's a tenant.
Yeah.
So they can just go ahead and vote. Are you guys going to do anything like that? Like, what are you going to do to make it easier for the tenants to vote?
That I can't speak to as of right now. We haven't necessarily talked about like a process of like, are we going to mail the ballots out? I think right now our approach, I think Sharon mentioned this a little bit earlier, is to really kind of connect with the property managers, simply because we're trying to get the information to be sent out to them through their channels. So for instance, I live in Vista Wild Lake. And so that particular building sends out information regarding a variety of different things, but I don't get anything, whether it's via mail or email, regarding Columbia Association. Period. And so one of the things that I think is just really important is just trying to get that property as a whole to actually partner with us, let us in, so that, CA is able to share information with the people that live there.
Yeah, let me make sure I understood that. You say you don't get any information on CA?
No.
Directly mailed to you?
No.
Okay, that's a takeaway for this board. So thank you very much. That's helpful information.
Absolutely.
All right. Anything else? Thank you for your testimony tonight. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Thank you. All right. That concludes our resident speak out portion tonight. Thank you, everybody. Did we?
I just heard about this meeting at 4:30 this afternoon. Can I have even a minute?
I will straw vote of the board.
Sure.
We got a couple. All right. Just really quick, if we could.
My name is Rhea Malloy. I live in Dorsey Search. Oops. Thank you. I live in Dorsey Search, and I'm a member of the Dorsey Hall Deer Management Task Force. And we agree with what the others have contributed tonight, and wholly support that. And I will put a formal note in that will go to all of you, since I wasn't able to deliver anything tonight, but just wanted to go and support.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for your comments. Any questions? On a quick question for you.
How did you hear about the meeting?
The chair of our task force has been in communication with Sky and with Kate, and I guess they informed her that there was a meeting tonight and that the deer management issue was going to be on the table.
Thanks.
So I really appreciate you letting me.
Thank you. All right.
Say a few
All right, thanks. Okay. Reg.
Yeah, one quick one. It's not a question, but actually for us, we need to be real careful because the last time we had our meeting, we denied Bill Campbell? Bill Campbell the same opportunity to speak.
I thought we had Bill talk.
Bill talked, but
I don't think he did.
Bill had signed up for resident speak out,
Bill-
he showed up, and you told him he wasn't on the list, and you didn't allow him to speak.
All right, well, so,
Oh, with Jenny. It was-
Jenny, I think, yeah.
That's right, it was Jenny, I'm sorry.
All right. All right, we would be more consistent. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I appreciate it, Reg. All right. Next on the agenda for tonight is our consent agenda, which consists of the approval of the draft minutes from October 24th, 2024. Any objection to the consent agenda? All right, no objection? The consent agenda is approved. There we go. Get to use the gavel. Moving on. Next item is old business, board budget discussion. Sean, if you want to start us off on this?
Sure, Susan Krabby's here to.
Sorry.
Oh.
Got a slide presentation.
Oh, need a minute here to, yeah, we probably need, let's take a 5-minute recess to reset the room here, because we're going to have a couple of presentations. We'll come back at 8:08. All right, folks, if we could take our seats and get back to work here. Thank you for giving us time to reset the room, but we are already in our 8 o'clock hour, and we still have a lot of meeting left to go, so. Sean, are we ready?
Yes, Susan Krabbe is going to give a brief presentation.
Thank you.
So, most of this material is in the packet or posted online, but I just pulled some of it together to help you focus and then for the community to see it as we talk. Probably after, yeah. So this is, I just want to emphasize that this information is preliminary, so we pulled this together fairly quickly, and there are refinements to come. So I think that assuming that depending on what you do with the assumptions and the operating kind of priorities, the relationships will still be the same when the budget's approved, draft is produced in January, but right now this is preliminary information. So, so the budget framework, we have the listen and prioritize part of the process that the board engages with in the community. We pull that stuff together and synthesizing, analyzing that and pulling it together. That's the staff work that we're in the process of doing, and then you all engage again and review and decide on that. So right now, we are it's November 14th, so you see we're part of the way through the process. We have our online feedback tool. We'll start tomorrow again, and on Monday, there's the Monday night, the special listening session for the board. So we, just like voting, I guess we're early and often on this, and wanting to engage the community at multiple points. You set the priorities in October, your last meeting, and we have tried to turn those around, like I said, quickly, but in preliminary information, and you'll approve it in February. So where we are as an organization, so for those of you who are new to the board, we've changed in a lot of ways since before the COVID-19 pandemic. We have clearly demonstrated the ability to manage expenses to revenue. We look at revenue as continuing to recover, but costs are increasing in that. And we've also worked really hard on process improvements. So one thing we just were talking about this morning, we have about half of our vendor payments now are electronic. That was a very small percentage previously, and all of that process is paperless regardless. And those cost reductions were before inflation. So we've done a lot of good work. So we continue to commit and manage and work, put lots of effort into community engagement. That was a new initiative, a named initiative that now has resources tied to it specifically. And that engagement and accessibility informs our programming. So where we are from a market standpoint, the economy has changed significantly. We had a lot of us were at an economic update on Tuesday. The rate of inflation is slowing from a 40-year high, but those prices are still really high. And I saw it demonstrated in an illustration. Like say I used to weigh 200 pounds. In 2020, I would have gained 5 pounds. In 2021, I gained 11. In 2022, 9. 2023, 6 pounds. This year, only 3. So better and better and better, right? But now I still weigh 234 pounds. That's exactly what's happened with inflation. So we see it last month, it came in at 2.6% year over year. That sounds great, but it's on top of multiple increases. Fed made 11 rate hikes in 2 years, and they made the second of a series of anticipated rate cuts just last week. Now the new bullet point on here is just what the uncertainty of the election results. Still some supply chain challenges that vary sporadically, and we also are still struggling with recruiting for mainly customer-facing positions, but also technical. A lot of trouble with IT vacant positions and some others. So major assumptions. First, we start with your strategic priorities, and as you should, just 2 weeks ago, voted on in your meeting. So open space, sustainability, focus on return on investment related to value and utilization with a focus on the annual charge payers' return on investment. You're interested, and it's a strategic priority of affordability and accessibility, reducing costs to members, focused on resident memberships and annual charge. Have a value on information technology and a related one, I believe, on data collection and analysis. So these initials on the side will be help you see later where we've aligned what we've done with those priorities. Other external factors, we've done our best to do a PESEL analysis to look at the political and the economic factors. These are things that are outside of our control. We had a meeting on yesterday, with our property casualty brokers. Still no information yet on the auto or the property increases, and those will be impacted by these storms and the wildfires that are happening right now. Obviously that isn't our direct issue, but it impacts the carriers in the market. Investment income, we already see that being significantly less than last year, and we'll see, if there's another rate decrease in December, we may adjust that even further. So the work that we've done to date assumes that the annual charge would not, rate or cap would not change. Just pointing out that 68 cents is over 9% below the maximum, and that the cap is 35% of the total maximum, and that Howard County's been at 5% for many, many years. So these are the key assumptions by department, and you'll see that in the materials that we presented, so I won't read through all of that. But again, we went through the effort to align your priorities with what's been done, and a couple new affordability objectives and initiatives. Around expanding the special pricing, which would be formerly known as income qualified, and memberships, and also looking at a group membership. Happy to know it's all 23 pools. The Art Center, looking forward to that reopening, and there's some fresh new spaces and new programming. School-age services at all 20 sites, but with a few more students at each one, hopefully, and that's morning and afternoon sessions, and that's very dependent on the ability to staff those. Modest increase in memberships, and we project a 3% growth in total members, and realigns the community engagement manager from the president's office to be embedded in the community programs and services. Community operations, got several new things going on here, continuing to prioritize this terrific sustainability program that we do at NCA and in the community. It adds a position for construction and facilities manager. That was the position that did exist in the organization before COVID. It was when we scaled back the capital investment because of the pandemic and the financial crisis. That position was eliminated, but now it's time to bring that back with the level of activity and investments that's happening. Ongoing expansion of tree planting and native invasive plant removal projects. Two new things: the development of a natural resources management plan and a pathway system study. So like 10 years ago or so, there was an active transportation plan that was done, and that's to take another look at the pathway system and the usage and value to the community. And then also the development of utilities management and more GIS service capacity. And then we have, in the past several years, included some facility assessment surveys. These are to assess the condition of our assets and help us to schedule out the maintenance and renovations that are required. And then there are required dam and pond safety inspections. Marketing and customer care, digital emphasis, and then we hear you and our community to expand our access and to connect with and nurture new audiences, and to broaden the application and achievement of health and wellness goals in Columbia. So administrative services at these dollars, these outcomes reflect the addition of one full-time position for IT operations and increased support desk needs. And then it also just reflects the filling of, as I mentioned, several long-time vacant positions that have been really difficult to fill. Also includes filling a long budgeted risk management position and some expanded hours in learning in OD and HR. There's also, as part of the modernization efforts and the absolutely essential place that technology plays for our human capital support, it's ongoing some external resources for HRIS optimization. And then you all see the cyber user training, and we continue to support that and make operating capital investments primarily around equipment that reaches its end of life and is not as up to date on its security elements as newer equipment. President's got a couple new initiatives that just reflects the understanding of the board's priorities, an economic impact study, and a membership structure and pricing study. And it also reflects the formal integration of communications into the president's office. Also included dollars for grants in FY26 for your deliberation and discussion. And then the board has board of directors funding for stakeholders events and some consulting services, not as much as in previous years, but still some consulting dollars there. Okay, so outcomes, bottom lines, a little under $3.5 million. Of these dollars, again, this preliminary work, community programs and services, this is really impressive to me. So annual charge subsidy of $3 million, just over $3 million. Now this includes a lot, many programs and services that don't generate revenue or generate very little, like the arts and cultural, the international programs, archives, youth and teen activities. And it also has the free and reduced program services that Dan talked about last time, so that at least $1.4 million of free and reduced financial support is included in that $3 million there. Community operations, $18.8 million of annual charge dollars. Just obviously not a revenue generator, but a huge community value for us and our residents. Administrative services, this is the biggest single change here is that decrease due to interest rates. And then finally, the proposed capital budget, that's $14.5 million, which is an increase of 11.5% or $1.5 million over 2025. So back in 2019, pre-COVID, that capital budget was $20 million, $5 million of which was for a kind of a one-time renovation of the athletic club. So we're moving back in that direction. We had a low of $8 million for 2 years, up to 11, 13, and now 14.5. Right, so I'll skip that. So very teeny tiny. I don't expect you to just, but I would ask you to take a look at this as you're reviewing your materials. We do show that we would be using cash in FY26 as opposed to generating it, and that's okay. We have the cash to use, and in part because of the we're assuming ongoing board support for the emergency cash reserves fund that you approved a few years ago. Tiny little numbers here. All I want to point out is that focus on the middle. Those 4 columns in the middle, that's comparing these FY26 preliminary numbers to the FY25, the current year estimate. So that has been updated from the budget. That's more relevant and more timely. And you'll see that, oh, I'm sorry, and I should have pointed that out. Thank you, Karen. So those materials are back there. Bottom line of $3,449,000 at this point.
Just, Susan?
Yes.
Just for those with the books, what page are you on? Do you know?
In the book, it's right, it's up at the top, 2.1.
Oh, there you go.
Or, yeah,
Okay.
2.2.
Just trying to be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So a visual representation of how the annual charge and interest, other income is used in these 20 preliminary outcomes. So it's how the annual charge supports CA's needs, and that includes the debt repayment, capital investment, and other priorities like the emergency cash reserves. So, let's see. Another tiny thing. This is important because this is looking at the projected revenue for the organization. This is page 11-2. It's interesting now that the community programs and services is back to exceeding the residential annual charge as far as income, the source of income goes, and that the commercial annual charge is 36% of that annual charge total, although far fewer payers.
Can I ask a quick question about?
We've only got a couple slides left, right?
Yep, only a couple more. I'll
Okay.
talk really fast.
But I'll come to you first, Mike, okay?
Yeah. So again, this is just so that you take a look at it. Page 3.2, it shows the community programs and services, again, focus on the middle. You will see that the increase in total income at 4% is just slightly better than the increase in operating expenses at 3%. Skip to that, same slide, same details, lots of little numbers for community operations. And then finally, just looking at the capital, in section 10-1, there's a summary of the projects and that we are proposing at this point. Behind that is some detail for each one, so take a look at that at your leisure. And then when we come back in December, I'll make sure that this has the assignment or the alignment of the strategic values to it. I did not do that on this slide.
For each of the capital projects?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Down to category 3 also?
No, we
Okay.
don't know what they are at this
All right,
point.
just checking.
Cases, right.
I appreciate the effort, though.
Yep. So then finally, just what does the $14.5 million do for the organization? It handles its normal maintenance. It fully funds most asset replacement cycles, with the exception of pathways and vehicles, some vehicles, but it does not facilitate new amenities. But it does, and that in and of itself aligns with the community input from the survey, which prioritizes values of the existing assets versus new ones. So we're continuing to build back up that capital investment after the COVID challenges. So, again, we're here, take the online survey, come to the, virtual public session, the board meeting in December, and keep checking the website. So
All right, thank you, Susan. All right, Mike?
So I guess I have some input that I have on the budget, but really what I had was just a quick question on the revenue. How does abatement get factored into this? Does that show up as it's projected as just a reduction in revenue, or is that like a cost somewhere?
It's a reduction of the annual charge revenue.
Okay.
You can see that in the quarterly financials. We get our first quarter, and that number is going to slowly go down until the end of the fiscal year. So, all right. Rich?
Thank you. Susan, you mentioned something about, or I may have misheard, something about pathway maintenance or
Pathway study?
improvement, renovation, or improvements. Did I misunderstand what you said?
In the community operations proposal, there is dollars for a pathway system study. But then I also said that the capital allocation of $14.5 million, the industry standard is a 25-year replacement cycle. This funds about a 30-year replacement cycle. And but Jeremy can speak more about that, about the staff assessment of that differential.
Okay. So actually, the real question is that I've had a couple of my residents asking them to widen and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, widen the path. So I didn't know if that was just something that was being added to the study or being considered in the study.
So the pathfinding issue will be something that's looked at in that study that we're planning to undertake next year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
And can I just elaborate on that?
All right, Sean?
Also, the study that Jarvin's working on, this goes to kind of, Dan's presentation too about visits. We're trying to do a count on the paths to see what kind of traffic we're getting and what kind of visits we have on the paths where those hotspots are. And just because it helps us in a number of ways, what the utilization is to see that as it relates to the other facilities. And also it helps us to, with awareness of CA, some of these initiatives we're doing internally so that we can reach people better. And if we know there's hotspots on the paths, how can we market better to those people or send out messaging that revolves around that to help reach those people.
Okay, all right. Eric?
Yes, I've got one concern and one question. So my concern is at the previous meeting, we said board priorities, one of which was to lower costs for residents. That include annual charge costs, include membership costs. I read this budget and I see we're doing the exact opposite. The annual charge revenue is going up, which means more money is coming from our residents in annual charge dollars. I see our membership costs or membership prices are scheduled to go up again by a modest amount, but still going up. So I see that that's not in compliance with what the board priorities were that we voted on at the last meeting. I think we were pretty clear about that. The second thing is with grants, we were pretty clear that we want to deprioritize grants, and yet I see 125K in grants, which is actually more than last year. So my concern is I don't feel like this budget is meeting the priorities that we set at the last meeting.
I can speak to some of that. So we did discuss this in the priorities to reduce the cost. One of those things was to look, we looked at making the pools more accessible, but also we talked about looking at all the facilities, all the membership charges, what are some options around that? So that's why we funded this study. It's called the Membership Structure and Pricing Study. That is what we're going to do. We're going to bring on a consultant to help kind of look at the numbers and see what we can do across CA. Can we include the pools? Are there other facilities to include? Are there things that we can do? We want to be able to present the board with all the options and be able to look at that. And part of that too is the economic impact study. Susan just mentioned there was an election and we want to know what's going to happen in the years to come. So whatever decisions we make as part of the rate structure study, we know that's going to be able to maintain in the foreseeable future. The grant we included because there's been requests for grant. This is an option for the board to consider. We're throwing it out there. If the board does not want to distribute any grants, then they don't have to. But there had been some other discussion around whether CA would continue the grant program, so we thought it would be good to add something in there for the board to discuss.
All right, Mike?
I think overall it looked really good. I kind of had the same take on grants that Eric had. I thought that what you just said about the affordability thing, I think that scratched my itch when it came to that strategic priority. But a couple new comments. I didn't think it hit the ROI strategic priority in the way that I was hoping. Like specifically when I see large decreases in net assets associated with specific programs, right? Whether that's outdoor pools or Hobbit's Glen, that's where I really start wondering, like, hey, is that really providing enough value to the community to justify that level of investment in those things? But other things like open space, I know that there's tens of thousands of people out there, like probably every day. But like, I also know that some pools like have more lifeguards than attendees. And I honestly don't know how many people are going to Hobbit's Glen. So that's where I'm really getting at, like with ROI, when there's a large decrease in net assets associated with certain amenities or services. I'd really like to look at that and kind of justify that investment is worthwhile. I also didn't think the decision support or the data analytics or whatever we're calling it, like I didn't see that really pop out to me as far as, hey, there's something in there that I can see us moving towards better information availability and data support for the board of directors. Like, I got it on some other things, but I didn't see anything that was helping the board of directors in that one. And then final point is, I know that there's a lot of trade-offs and realities, but I would definitely like to see us, if not in this budget, in future budgets, get up to industry standards for asset replacement for pathways and vehicles and equipment.
Okay, all right. Karen?
Yeah, I actually meant to send this, I'm sorry, I'm moving. I actually meant to send this to Jeremy this week, so Jeremy, I apologize. What I noticed when I was looking through the budget is that we continue to fund the watershed management plan, and all the projects in the watershed management plan have been completed, and we're at the point where we actually need to do an assessment to see what we've done and what needs to go forward, which feeds directly into what you're working on, Sean, with the natural resources plan. But additionally, we're not spending, I think we're budgeting year over year something like 300, 400,000, and we're not even spending the money. I think we're leaving quite a bit of the money on the table. So I would wonder why, if every year we're not spending anywhere close to what we're budgeting, why we're still budgeting that much money for the watershed management plan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Karen. Let's see, so a couple points. So the watershed management plan is an extensive document, and we have not completed it. There are hundreds of recommended projects that are in an appendix to that plan that have not been completed. There are also numerous other resources that have been completed through other entities like Howard County in terms of their Little Patuxent and Middle Patuxent watershed studies that have identified dozens of projects to complete throughout Columbia. So we don't necessarily need to even reference our own watershed management plan to identify necessary watershed projects to complete in the community. There has been a little bit of a slowdown on some of the projects coming out of COVID. Our watershed manager has officially retired, and so we're expecting to have a ramp up in execution of those projects in the next couple of years.
What projects are still not completed from the original watershed management plan? I mean, I think that one of the things that I would really like to see is if we still have all of these projects and we're continuing to budget this money, I would really like a presentation to the board, and maybe that can be something we put on the board operations committee meeting in December. But I would really like to understand, because I've read through that plan, I've been over it with a lot of people. Yes, it is an extensive plan, but from what I can see, we've finished all the projects that were listed, that were recommended by, I believe it's Varsar when they did that plan. So I would really be interested in what is our watershed management plan going forward. So I think some information for the board would be very helpful.
I think it's helpful to put it on the board topics list. Thank you for that. Just Sky, and then we'll go to Eric.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. First of all, about the grants and donations. I had requested on the database that we ask questions of a history of how much we have donated over the last 10 years so we can see kind of what we've done. We do that for my village every year because we're really big on donation requests. And I was wondering along those lines, well, there are two questions. Number one, should we get into that business? Should we have a positive amount for grants every year? And if so, what should that number be? And obviously, it could be different every year. And I was wondering if John Kuchno could look into those two policies, because my fear is that we're going to get a request for a donation this year, and we have set aside zero funds. So I want to kind of prevent that. And secondly, tell me if this is the wrong time to approach this, but I'm totally in favor of a full-time position for a wildlife biologist, if not fiscal year 26, then the following. Perhaps we could start out with a part-time. Lacking that, we could get the villages together and have a village-wide task force. I've lived here for 35 years, and it's only been the past 3 years that I've seen an increase in roadkill. that my bushes have been snacked on. After the last CA board meeting, I think we got out at about 9:30. When I was within a block of my house, I hit a deer, and that was very traumatic. For me, I'm fine, my car's fine. I don't think the deer is still in perfect health. And when I was in college, my major was vertebrate zoology, so I would love to take that position. So could that, a request for a full-time wildlife position be at the end of this where the special projects are?
All right. Well, we can certainly make that request. So, Eric, and then I'm going to insert myself in the queue.
Given that we've started talking about the capital budget, two questions on the capital budget. One on 10-23, I see $1 million for Lake Kit dredging. I thought we already allocated $1.5 million for dredging Lake Kit last fiscal year, and that project should have been completed this fiscal year. So I'd like to know why we're dredging Lake Kit again.
We're not, the $1.5 million was not adequate once we went out to bid and the bids came back much higher. So Jeremy can talk more about that probably. So that project hasn't even been awarded a contract.
So the question I have is why were we so far off then?
Yeah, so a couple factors. Inflationary pressure over the last couple of years on the construction industry has been significant, far greater than I think what you've seen within other aspects of the economy. We're also asking for supplemental funding to make that number larger to maximize the value we get out of the project. So there's about $500,000 in costs just to mobilize, just to get the contractor to the site. So if we have the contractor at the lake, we've already spent the $500,000 to get them there. We actually are adding more funds than we had originally planned to take more sediment out of the lake next year. So by delaying it a year, we're addressing the increase in costs to actually do the base amount of work. And we're also adding additional tonnage of sediment removal in the project with the additional funding. So we're going to do a larger project than we anticipated, and we're also responding to the pricing realities that we found.
So are we spending $1.5 million this year to dredge Lake Kit?
No, we are bundling the funds together into one large project.
So now I'm really confused. Okay. Because we allocated $1.5 million last year, and now you want another $1 million this year. So that's $2.5 million, but I see two different line items. So how are we bundling this together? How does that work from a budget standpoint?
Well, the $1.5 million was not spent, so it will carry into the next fiscal year as a capital funding that's available, and we'll aggregate it together and determine this spring for a work for a project for this next fall, 25.
Okay. The other question I have is on 1026, the Wild Lake tennis courts. So it looks like it's $460,000 to repair, I think, 5 of the courts. The question I have is, what will be the hours for using those courts for residents next spring?
They will operate under hours similar to Owen Brown, and off the top of my head, I don't know what they
Okay, so those courts will be open for residents' use? Okay, thanks.
All right, so just Paul, I'll get you. I wanted to, occasionally I have 2 cents to put in. It's, number one, Eric, I appreciate your comments about saving money and providing reduced cost to residents. But I believe Susan said that even with this preliminary budget, as we're looking at, we're going to be losing money by the end of FY26. If we reduce costs even further, we're going to be losing more money. And I don't know if that's financially possible, but it's not a good steward of our budget process. Second, I applaud Sky's idea about bringing in a wildlife management expert. I'm not sure if hiring somebody is the right first step. We may want to look into contracting with somebody or hiring a consultant first to do the work on a for-hire basis. And then once we've more fully fleshed it out and have the ability to put it in the budget, we could do it at a later year. But to start now with somebody on a contract basis, I think would be more efficient and should be considered. And then I think we had Paul, and then I'll go to Mike, and then I'll go to Eric.
Okay, so with the capital budget, so I see some with like the category 1 projects, there's some like just very kind of vague line items that don't really have much explanation. At a later date, do we get like the specific projects that are underneath those line items? It says here like they'll be specifically identified and approved by the board in the budget process. So I just wasn't sure like how that works with the for example, like Columbia-wide building energy retrofits. Like, are there projects that are tied to those funds that have been identified already?
Yeah. Oh, you want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So these are very similar to the Columbia-wide funding in terms of the projects are very small in scale, so these are larger buckets of funds that our subject matter experts on our team identify projects throughout the fiscal year. Some of them are actually programmed out for the coming fiscal year. For example, building energy retrofit, we already know we're going to do a lighting improvement at the Fairway Hills Maintenance Barn. So these are smaller projects that our subject matter experts identify throughout the year to implement.
Yeah.
And so they're reported on a quarterly basis as they're identified. The category system, the board approves the funding for those priorities, for those initiatives, like the Going Green. These were mainly environmental sustainability initiatives that then get divided up into smaller amounts.
All right. Yeah, and if like all that funding isn't used in one year, I heard it's carried forward to the next year. How much funding is available from prior years for these? Is that number available? And, that's been authorized.
Well, we report it quarterly.
It's in the quarterly book.
That's in the quarterly
There's
book.
an
Okay,
exhibit for capital, a summary of capital spending.
Okay. I see. Thank you. Yeah, I'm still trying to, figure out all of it and understand how
Good questions, Paul.
this works, but thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Just a point of order, we've got like 9 minutes left in our conversation.
I feel like I have an important just clarification.
Yes.
So the budget does not, these outcomes don't show CA losing money. What we see is CA using cash, not generating cash. So the bottom line is still positive. I just wanted to.
My apologies. So
I probably wasn't clear and I was talking really fast.
I probably didn't explain that clearly or state that clearly enough either. Certainly, I take some responsibility for that. I saw Ashley's hand go up. She hasn't spoken yet. Then I'm going to go to Mike and then Eric.
Great. When I was looking through the budget, one of the things that I was curious about, since accessibility is one of our strategic priorities, I saw that the 2012 was the last time we did the ADA assessment. So I was wondering, are there any plans? I obviously don't know the cost of doing this, of having another assessment done since best practices have improved over the past decade.
I mean, that's a great example of a goal for the board to set for an annual goal. I know we've set the goals for this year, but if the board wants to look into something like that, we can certainly make that one a goal for the board to agree on.
Awesome. And then another one I know is part of our strategic priorities conversation coming up next. We've discussed changing the mission and vision that you can see displayed behind you. I know it's at least in multiple places in this building. So I'm curious, if we change this, obviously we have to also change all of the displays, all of the promotional materials everywhere, which is obviously going to be an additional cost. Is this something that the board is doing every 5 years? Like, are we having to change all of these materials? Because that seems like a cost that could be avoided for something like that.
I can't speak to the history, but this is from 2019, so it's been, 5 years now. So, and I don't know what was posted before that. I think that, Susan can probably speak best to that.
We didn't do as good a job as posting it before that. So, but I think that that would be something that we would build into and would be factored into the marketing and the communications budgets for this year going forward. And we're continually, I think from a material standpoint, what's on the website and all that we're continually refreshing them anyway. So it would just be where these signs needed to be changed.
I just figured it was probably at least in every building and then some print materials, right? So that seemed like it could be a substantial cost we could avoid if we don't change it.
Dry erase boards.
Yeah.
Mike? All right, pass. Okay, on to Eric, right?
Susan kind of beat me to my punchline. But yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that the bottom line is we're $3.5 million up when we look at increase in net assets according to this budget. And to look at historicals, this year alone, we're up, looks like $5.5 million. FY24, we're up 8 million, 23, 7 million, 22, 10 million. So from a net asset standpoint, we've been making a fair amount every single year, to the point where I think we came into this fiscal year with about $40 million in cash, if you include the emergency cash reserves, going into the current fiscal year. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to provide a lot of additional value to residents. I think this is a great opportunity to look at ways to lower costs. I know that is one of the priorities we set at the last meeting. I think we can do it this year. I don't think we need lengthy studies. I think this is something we can do, figure out ways to lower resident costs, whether it's looking at reducing membership costs or reducing the annual charge. But I think we're in a good financial situation now where we can make that happen this year.
Right, so at the end of the year, we'll have 3 million at April 30th, is that what you're saying?
It's the increase in net assets is budgeted to be $3.5 million.
On April 30th.
So the net assets will, according to the budget, is projected to go up by $3.5 million looking at this draft.
Right.
Can I?
Sure.
Well, I can tell you one thing. If we've all watched the outcome of the election and we're reading the news of what some of the plans are, we're very sensitive to what the economy could be like and the job market could be like. So we would certainly want to look at that to see what happens with that. We wouldn't want to budget for reducing costs, and without really assessing the impact CA-wide and, in the years to come. So, a lot could happen fast. We want to make sure that we're in a position that, CA is stable financially.
I'll say a lot can happen every year. I mean, every 4 years is an election year. Every 2 years is a midterm year. I mean, a lot can happen all the time.
I agree with this. There's been a lot of discussion about making some drastic changes frequently. So, that may not come to fruition, but we certainly want to be prepared for that. Much like, every year we would look at it to be prepared for a recession and look at the market and prepare for that.
But that's one of the reasons why we have that emergency cash reserves. It's one of the things that we're in pretty good shape. So that's my opinion.
All right. Karen.
Yeah, it would be helpful, Bill, if you didn't roll your eyes every time I asked a question. Sean, what are you guys doing to prepare for January 20th? Like, we're looking at this budget now, and it is a reality, some of the things that we've been hearing on the news, and we're all a little bit on edge. And so what is CA doing to prepare itself? Are we going to have to revisit this entire budget? What's the go-forward
We're
plan?
budgeting conservatively.
Right.
And so we're waiting to see what happens. I mean, this process, the board's not going to approve the final budget until February, so that gives us some time to I think a lot's, like I said, I believe, and it's my opinion, that a lot's going to happen fast when it does happen, or we'll get word of it. So, and we'll have to plan for that and revisit. Now, if February comes and nothing's happening, then I think we have a good budget to get us through the fiscal year.
Okay. Thank you.
Susan.
I just would add too that we're all we're digging into it. We're paying attention. We're going to we're reading. We're watching. So we're trying to stay as informed as possible with all this stuff.
Okay. Anything else? All right, we're finishing up. Well, we were going to finish up 2 minutes.
I mean, I guess, did Susan and Sean, did y'all get what you needed from this? Were you looking for anything specific, or?
I think we've presented an overview of what the budget is going to look like. So the board's had some comments, but I think we're going to move forward with what we've proposed. And, we'll present, now we have the public information session coming up Monday. We'll get some feedback then, and then we'll be back before the board next month to discuss this again with what the comments have been from the public.
Right. And then in December, we'll ask you to approve the assumptions so that we can deliver a draft. So you have time and the community has time.
Okay. All right. So 1 minute to spare? Very good. Thank you all for your input on the budget topic. We're now going to move on to the strategic plan.
All right. So Judelle Campbell, our community planner, is here, and she's going to give a presentation on the strategic plan that the SLT has been working on, along with all of the staff. You'll see they've all contributed in some form or fashion. The board has asked, as part of what the number one goal is to finalize the strategic plan. It's been in all hands on deck, aside from the CRM, kind of internally with the SLT and staff, and you all have been great. You've all met with Judelle Campbell individually to talk about the FY19 plan, the draft 24 plan, the retreat. You've been great about providing a lot of really individually some great information and feedback. And Judelle's going to kind of walk through the process, and we're going to present a framework tonight that I think is unique, and I think you'll appreciate it, and it allows you all, the board, to be a little more nimble in the future about following the strategic plan and how you set your goals around that. So with that, without stealing Judelle's thunder, I'll let her continue.
Hello, good evening, everyone. For those watching online and who I've not met yet, my name again is Judelle Campbell, and I'm the community planner for the Columbia Association. I have a lot to cover tonight, and I'm not trying to keep you long, so I'll ask that you hold all your questions and thoughts to the end of the presentation. I promise I'll go back, we'll review, and we'll get to any questions that you may have, because we want to hear your feedback. I'll just give you a brief overview of the slides that we're going to be going through today. And the first one just kind of gives a roadmap for where we're going with this presentation. I'd like to introduce the team that's working to finalize the strategic plan, provide some plan history and context to help those listening understand where we left off with the draft 2024 strategic plan that was not adopted, and then proceed to some updates on the most recent work that's been done to finalize the plan, reviewing what we've heard in board interviews, what we learned after looking at outside sources of information, establishing some definitions and approaches to the work, and also to develop the framework, and also what we're doing as a result of what we learned and what we heard in those interviews, as well as the feedback that we got from the board retreat that was held in the summer of 2024. So the strategic plan finalization team includes yours truly, Judelle, that's me, the senior leadership team, yourselves, the FY 2025 board, and several staff members. I won't get into names now, but I appreciate all the support of staff that have helped with this process so far. Continuing on, how did we get here? So we left off, our last approved plan was the 2019 plan, as you all know. The draft 2024 plan was not approved, but it was accepted by the last board for consideration by the incoming board and the new CEO to address it if they desired. Some issues with the 2024 draft plan that were noted. It was said it was very operational, not forward thinking. There were issues with the consultant approach and the work product on both staff level and board level. There were other challenges to that process, like the short time frame that we were under, and a transition in leadership from an interim CEO to a new CEO. What's been done since that? There was a board retreat conducted by a new consultant, Maryland Nonprofits. In that retreat, the consultant, Maryland Nonprofits, worked to build consensus on direction from participants, which included the current board members at the time, the incoming board members, senior leadership staff, and some of the village board chairs that were able to attend. That FY 2025 board, once they started meeting and had their sessions, tasked the new incoming CEO, Sean, who's now here, with finalizing the plan for approval by January 2025, and made that board goal number one to finalize and complete the strategic plan. I'll just note the new consultant, Maryland Nonprofits, also took a higher level visioning focus and worked with attendees to remove some of the operational items from the draft 2024 plan and get consensus on areas of alignment. So where we are in the process, in Sean's schedule, as you'll see to the right, he had some phases and some requests of the work that we are to do. We are currently in phase 2, but we will also be talking about the work that we completed in phase 1 and hopefully show you how that work led to the framework that you're going to see tonight. There were a review of past plans, of course, the board interviews, which touched on questions from those plans, and some research that we've done on the side to try and just get more ideas around definitions and things like that. So the interview process, for those that were not involved, the questions for the interviews were developed by the senior leadership team, and they addressed 3 sections: the mission and vision, the 2019, the last approved plan, the 2019 strategic plan, and the draft 2024 plan. All current board members participated. Previous plans were provided for pre-reading, and the interviews were facilitated by myself and 1 or 2 of the senior leadership team members and the CEO when possible. That was all done within a span of about 4 weeks during the month of September. And on to our questions. So the questions we asked, how well do you think CA is accomplishing its mission and vision? We also asked, does the current mission and vision statement accurately reflect the organization's purpose and core activities in today's environment? And then we asked, do you think the mission and vision statement should be worded differently or have wording added or deleted? What we got from those questions, there was a lot of different opinion on what to do with mission and vision, but we did find some insight that was useful for development and strategy, and I've noted some of those things here to the right. There was the comment that we could and need to do better, find out why it's difficult to get groups engaged, and this speaks to question number 1 in how well we're accomplishing our vision, which most of these things we heard kind of addressed that first question. Also, it was noted that some groups are harder to engage, so we can improve by figuring out those harder to engage groups. Someone commented, yes, we're doing well for some in some areas, but no for others. There's a comment that there's always room for improvement. We need to engage different generations of people. We need to do better engaging the blind and hearing impaired, and we should also focus on the education side and less on the promotional side when it comes to that. Next slide. So we moved on to questions in focus area, the focus areas from the 2019 plan. We asked all the board members to rank the focus areas in areas and levels of importance, and also to let us know if they felt that any items were missing as strategic priorities. The top 3 items that came from that ranking process was that environmental sustainability was probably most important of all 3. We also heard very close in tie were the following 2 with resource stewardship and identity in terms of what was priority. There was also a note about things that seemed to be missing in terms of priorities, and those were the concept of affordability and also the emphasis on health and physical well-being and wellness. So we got to the draft 2024 plan, which, as I said before, we had some struggles with. We asked questions about what people liked about the plan, what they didn't like, what they thought could be improved. Even with the people that thought it was okay, still thought there were areas for improvement. So we definitely heard more discussion on issues with the draft plan, issues with the consultant, the process, the operational nature, as was stated before. But we also noted some items that were missing, and among those are resilience. There was a request to include resilience as an area of focus or in our strategic thinking, innovation, risk management, and to include metrics, which was missing from the last draft process. One person also commented that there needs to be a clear material benefit to the community. So what we heard repeatedly, this slide kind of takes into account things we heard from more than one person. I'll just highlight a few. You'll get these slides later so you can go into detail. But among those things were the communication of value. People don't know the value of what they're getting for their annual charge. That's something that came up repeatedly. Also, the importance of resource management and resource stewardship. DEIB came up a lot. Although there were differing views on how to address it, it was pretty popular. And there was also a reoccurring theme of the plan being too much in the weeds. this slide, what else we heard. The slide before kind of gave us a grasp on consensus that we heard in interviews, although we had them separately, just kind of things that we heard over and over. So the following slide is just kind of the things that stuck with me after the interviews and that I really kind of came back to me as I was going through this process. One of them that I didn't get on this slide, it's pretty crowded as you can see, was the concept that it's all about community, and community is everything here. It's very important to us. Other things that we heard that stuck that we'll see repeated as we go through this framework. The school of thought matters. How high level are we going to be? How operational are we going to be? We heard that it's important to separate identity from community engagement. It's important to build key partnerships, maintain relationships, have conversations with partners to make sure you know their goals and find out how common goals can be achieved. We also heard the comment that we should consider omitting specific objectives and specific items and focus on what our strengths and values are and what our challenges are and figuring out underlying strategies for those. And the last thing I have in bold, and this is a great segue for my next slide, is we heard that we need some definitions around mission, vision, and strategic planning and figuring out how we're approaching things. So in the next slide, we found some definitions that were useful in moving forward, and we took a look at mission and vision as a mission statement being an explanation of why an organization exists, what its purpose is, and a vision statement as being what an organization would like to see in the future as a result of its efforts. And some guidance that we found in our search about how to approach mission and vision, or how to approach mission specifically, or to ask yourselves, whom does the organization serve? What does the organization do? And why does the organization do it? Then we found some really helpful information from the University of Minnesota's Principles of Management, where they talk about the roles played by mission and vision. And these roles kind of help us communicate our purpose to stakeholders. If you think of the mission statement as who we are and what we value, and the vision statement as what we want to become, then you can go forward and develop your strategy, which is how you will achieve that vision. And in tonight's presentation, we're going to stop at this green arrow. As you'll see in the slides going forward, we're focusing here on everything up to the green arrow. In the next slide, you can see a little of this is like a sneak peek into our thought process of where we're going. We kind of, I think one more, yes. So at the green slide, that's where we're stopping tonight and kind of where we're focusing for our strategic plan. After that process is complete, staff will go and work on annual work plans that will address goals and objectives that will specifically get us back to reaching our vision. Next slide. Okay, so definition of strategic planning. Strategic planning is a process that helps organizations define their direction, set goals, identify areas for improvement, and it's supposed to be a forward-looking process that involves analyzing trends and issues to align an organization's priorities. The goal is to create a plan that's going to help the organization achieve its vision and succeed. So what are some of the benefits of strategic planning? It helps us to prioritize critical issues, allocate resources effectively, helps us to align our goals, helps us to adapt to changing circumstances, helps us to differentiate ourselves from competitors so people know who's who and who can do what and how they can help. It also helps us to change direction and create a direction for the organization and structure for making day-to-day decisions, and take action before problems become crises. Next slide. So this was the part that gave me the most angst, and looking back and trying to put all the feedback from all the phases together. In the interviews, we covered these first two columns with the FY19 plan and the questions there, and questions on the draft 2024 plan, as well as questions about the mission and vision. What we did not ask in the interviews was questions about the board retreat, but we did have a report from the board retreat. Consultants provided us a report that showed areas of alignment, areas of consensus around different topics that were discussed. And the areas, as you see listed in this column here, are kind of what led us to let's try to move towards that feedback that we got in the board retreat, because that represents consensus from the board members, the staff members, and some village board chairs all sitting in the room. So we use that as kind of our guide. And in the next slide, we started drawing some arrows. We tried to figure out, I know it's messy, it's a little scary, try to figure out what things aligned where from past processes, and to figure out where there was some alignment so we could start the work of synthesis. And when I say synthesis, I mean information synthesis as the process of analyzing and evaluating information from various sources and making connections between the information found and combining the recently acquired information with prior knowledge to create something new. So our something new, as it's starting to take shape, is really to consider things that were important to us in each process, but probably in a different way than we considered them before. Everything is not going to be able to be a focus area, but there were definitely things that were important to all of us in terms of strategy that we wanted to make sure were emphasized throughout the plan. So I drew some arrows here to kind of show you some of those things that we're considering. We started to think about community engagement as possibly a strategy under a larger umbrella, under something bigger that we're going for. And I crossed out engagement, as you see in that proposed column. This column represents where we're kind of going next phase. And I put connection, because I think community connection is kind of a larger umbrella which can house community engagement, but also a lot of the other things that seem to be falling into place. So that's, in that proposed column, you see community connection there as a new concept in terms of a focus area. You can also see some of the things that we talked about as important. Modernization was talked about as very important in the board retreat, kind of flowed through all the focus areas. It wasn't just its own thing. So I drew some arrows to kind of show just it's going various places, and some of the other elements you'll see later also do the same thing. We thought about, and I think it was mentioned, DEIB was a huge topic of conversation in all the interviews, but we didn't know what to do with it. But we started to give some thought to thinking about maybe it should be in a different place instead of its own category. Maybe it makes more sense to be a part of our mission, or just to think about it differently than we had before. Next slide. So this slide represents those 4 proposed focus areas and kind of some of the things from previous processes, some of the words and phrases that kind of fit in those houses and kind of came together. As you can see, we've made kind of a little legend about where things came from. I think the pink is concepts from the board retreat. The underlined is concepts from the FY19 plan. And then the other thing is, the other item is from the draft 2024 plans. We try to make some indication of where things came from so you could see how our brains were working and how we were coordinating things. Next slide. So the 4 areas of strategic focus that we came up with were community connection, wellness, environmental sustainability, and resource resilience. I will say each description you see, except for the last one, well, part of the last one too, the descriptions you see there are really verbatim taken from the new consultants report from the board retreat, where they talked about areas of consensus that came up at the board retreat. So I put those in there to show you that's how we came to choose these 4 pretty much. And for number 4, because it was a pretty new concept, we looked and tried to get a definition of resilience to kind of help us wrap our heads around what could be the focus area. I'm just going to say we considered resilience as an organization's ability to adapt to changes, recover from disruptions, and thrive in new circumstances. It's more than just disaster recovery. It involves preparing for and responding to unexpected challenges. And in the next slide, you can kind of see, we didn't forget about the strategic emphasis areas. They aren't focus areas, but now we've got these green arrows showing you that we're going to have areas of strategic emphasis that flow throughout the plan. They're going to touch every focus area and every aspect of everything we do. And first in line was DEIB, as was considered before. It's going to flow throughout the plan. As was noted from the consensus in the board retreat. Also modernization, a concept from the board retreat, is going to flow throughout the plan. Then you have the discussion of awareness of value and identity. That also flew from the board retreat. Two new items that kind of came up in the interviews as things we should consider as strategic emphasis are risk management and affordability and accessibility. And I'll note, I was really excited about the inclusion of affordability here, keeping in mind how it flows well with our emphasis on equity in the DEIB and how it deals with community connection and inclusion and allowing those that can't afford or have to choose between affording participating in our programs and maybe something more drastic like rent or food or things like that. Just making, as you can see in the graphic at the bottom, making it possible for everyone to access the fruits of our labor and our resources. So from that concept of affordability being with the goal of equity in mind and trying to make sure that we are being equitable, we have equity and that we're also making it possible to include people of varying financial resources and that may have financial or physical barriers to participation. So that's the affordability and accessibility we're talking about there. Next slide. So this is a more refined way of looking at our different focus areas. As you can see, again, we've got strategic areas of emphasis throughout the plan in the green with the green arrows. We've got our 4 focus areas as was outlined before, but I wanted to also give you an idea of some of the components of those focus areas and how they kind of line up with the work we do, especially in the wellness category, which is a new, I guess, focus area concept, which was not included in previous plans. Wellness is going to take into account our programs and services and how they address well-being for physical, mental, and intellectual wellness. As Dan presented in the last board meeting, we do have 5 pillars of wellness with CA, but for the purposes of this framework, we chose to focus on these 3 in the wellness focus area because for social well-being, we have a whole community connection category that covers that very well. And also environmental is its own focus area. So for environmental wellness, which is the 5th pillar, I believe, we address that there. But these are kind of the things that are included. Environmental includes a consideration of the natural environment, the built environment in our operations, and resource resilience deals with our financial resource resilience, also the resilience of our physical resources like buildings and land, and then an additional category, and I thank SLT for helping me to place this one here, was the consideration of our people resources and our human capital. So that's what's considered in resource resilience. Next slide. And this is the overall framework. After all that work and after all the consideration of all the pieces and all the things, this is where we landed. You've got your 4 focus areas and the components of those focus areas, and then you've got your strategic emphasis areas that flow throughout the entire plan. Also wanted to show you, and as I mentioned before, when I talked about the arrows and how we're stopping here, we view this as the outline for the strategic plan that we're finalizing, and this is where we need the board to take the responsibility of this area is where you set the direction, where you set the tone for where the plan goes and give us guidance on how to continue building out. So the work of the goals and objectives, the organizational goals and objectives, that work will be done with the annual work plans that will be completed by staff. But this kind of represents a whole picture and where we would like your feedback today. Is that the last slide? Oh, yes, this slide is from Sean. He really wanted you all to see how your board goals that you all are kind of ahead of us because you already got your goals. We're still working on the framework. But he wanted to show you how your goals that you've already kind of set up and started working on short-term and long-term feed into this framework and how they fit under the different focus areas. So he's just have a chart here to show you where the goals that you've chosen, I think they're listed here, the items that you selected as your goals from the year fall under the strategic plan. And then I'm almost there. I got a couple more slides and then we'll get to questions. Then we have some ideas for mission and vision. These are kind of from the ideas that came out of interviews. A lot of people said they weren't fans of the current mission and vision, but there weren't a whole lot of ideas actually available as to how we change it. These were the few that we got from the board. And the next slide has the options that I think have been developed since the interviews. There's been a staff contest, as you're aware, to solicit feedback on ideas for mission and vision. SLTs also met and discussed some things and come up with these options. So thank you for bearing with me. This is your time for feedback. We'd love to hear what you think.
Can I just, before we ask questions, I just want to provide, Judel's done a phenomenal job through all of this, and she's really helped all of us to stay on point, and you've all met with her individually, and I think she's done an amazing job. I just want to, if you go back to the framework slide,
sure. I
just want to provide a little clarification. I know it's busy, and Judel kind of hit on it, is, for the board, I thought it was important that at a very high level, the board makes decisions on what are these strategic focus areas, and they're important, and you've made that clear. We set the mission and vision. Okay, they align with, you'll see the example mission and visions, and you need to pick, and Judel walked through the process. Usually you have a mission and vision, and then you set your strategic focus areas. Well, the mission and vision here is pretty consistent, and it's really just around wording and refining the message. So they really, you'll see the options align with these strategic focus areas. But the emphasis areas, they're great because they flow through everything CA does. So we thought it was really important that they are very important, but they're just kind of core to CA no matter what we're doing, no matter what the focus areas are for these particular 5 years. And then you just have this nice framework for the board to consider on an annual basis, and then every year the board sits down, and just like we did this year, like, well, what are our goals for the year? Every board is different, and every board gets to take an opportunity to say, all right, well, we established really an umbrella of focus areas with strategic emphasis areas, and what do we want for goals for the year? So it takes a little bit to go through, and I know when you see it for the first time, it's it might be confusing, but it really kind of encapsulates everything we're trying to achieve, and like in a different framework than you've seen previously. So sorry.
All right, and just one quick administrative note. Due to a family obligation, I have to get out of here right now, so I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Colin Sullivan. Give it up for the vice chair here. He's got the gavel, and he'll lead you through the rest of this discussion and the balance of this meeting. I apologize, Judel. Thank you for such a great presentation. I'll try and look to provide some input offline, so thank you all.
Thank you.
So can I just get one last clarification, Judel and Sean, what scope of conversation would be most helpful right now?
What we're trying to leave here tonight, and we can go over the proposals for mission and vision statements, and then the board can take those back and come back at the next meeting. And with that, we just want you to agree on the framework here, so we can go and start to refine the plan for a draft plan for next month.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah, so Sean, thank you. I wanted to especially thank Judel. I think she's done an amazing job on this. I'm a huge Judel fan. And I also want to thank the senior leadership team and everybody who interviewed us. For the first time, looking at this, and I know it's just high level, and we're going to get into the details, there'll be a lot of discussions, but I feel like the board is being listened to and that you guys have actually incorporated our thoughts. So I wanted to thank you for that, because from what I'm looking at now, I think it looks really, really good, and I feel like we can build on this. So thank you so much for that. That is my only comment for now. I'll let the rest of the discussion go, but I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank you.
Thank you.
Eric?
Can you go back to the goals slide again?
This one, Eric?
Yeah, so I'm looking through the minutes, mainly the September 12th minutes. I believe we
Eric, could you turn on your, thank you.
Sorry, so I'm looking through the September 12th minutes where we actually approved the goals, and I believe we approved Goal 4, which stated analyze opportunities to add value and or reduce costs associated with accessing or using CA facilities, programs, and services, as well as the annual charge. Why is that goal not included on this?
We didn't agree to that. I can go back and look, but I remember distinctly at the time that, I'll double check.
It's in the minutes that we approved it.
Okay, I mean, okay. I can look at it. And we're essentially kind of doing that anyways. It's not like one of the official goals, but yes.
And the next question I have is, so we got a nice framework here, and I think this is a good philosophy, which is basically what you want from a strategic plan. But the question that I always have in my mind is, okay, what's the impact? a strategic plan without impact is meaningless. So I'd like us to maybe have some thoughts on what is the impact of the strategic plan. When this gets executed, what's the impact on my neighbors? What's the impact on the residents? What's the impact on Columbia? That's I think the part that's still missing.
Well, it is sort of in the framework, but the impact is in every year the board assigns goals for the year based on this framework. So that's the impact. So you're wondering what the impact is this year. There could be, in 3 years, there could be a completely new board, and they still have the opportunity based on these focus areas to have impactful goals. So it's the goals that are the impacted, but this is the framework to assess, to kind of develop the goals.
No, I realize that, and that's fair. I'm just trying to get an idea of what are the potential impacts. Like if we approve this versus something else, what's the long-term impact? And I'm not expecting an answer right now, but I think it's something that we as an organization should be thinking about.
Janelle?
Thanks. I just wanted to mention that's work we still had to do in terms of measuring impact and dealing with metrics, and that's something that I think will be dealt with the organizational goals and objectives phase. That's something was part of the goal number 1 was to look at metrics, and we're getting there, so we will. So thank you for your comment.
Mike?
Overall, I think the framework is really good with the strategic focus areas, the emphasis areas, and then allowing more nimble and staff-oriented goals and objectives. So I think that framework is really good and will serve CA well. I think generally I like the 4 strategic focus areas. If I'm nitpicky, like wellness sounds a little hokey to me. I genuinely think I agree with the intent behind it, and it's more just semantics around the naming. I would probably call it like quality of life or something. But I do think like underneath that, like, yeah, wellness is important, but I just want to see like fun, right? It should be a good place for people to live. And I know that's probably implied in there, but like I think that's, I would like to see that like fun in there. And I like most of the strategic emphasis areas. I'm pretty skeptical of DEIB. It's been defined in a gazillion different ways, and I think some of them are good, some of them are bad. So I certainly think CA needs to prioritize making sure we're serving everyone in our diverse community, and that's a really good thing. But sometimes that term gets applied to employ some really weird, in my opinion, group-based disparity analysis, and I really don't want that to be part of CA strategy.
Karen?
I just want to make sure that I understand Michael correctly. You do not want diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to be part of the CA strategy?
Yeah, I think that term is just such a nebulous term that it would not serve well in the strategy. Yes, that is true.
Could I have a follow-up? Mm-hmm. Michael, I'm really confused because one of the things we talked about at the retreat was you actually wanted an entire category dedicated to DEIB. And one of the things I was arguing for was that we should embed it in our strategy, that it needed to be, when we make decisions about anything, that we're always making decisions about the entire community, whether it be age, whether it be race, whether it be income, that all of those things are taken into consideration. And that's what that DEIB is talking about, that we're thinking about, if I'm going to make a change to the gym, what communities am I impacting, who's going to take the biggest hit, who's going to get the most benefit, and everything in between. And you're saying you don't want that.
You're definitely misremembering whatever conversation you think we had at the retreat. But yes, so you're getting towards like the disparity-based impact analysis that I don't think should play a role in a strategic plan. Yeah.
Sky?
First of all, I have an editor's eye, but this is not the time or place for it. Looking at this from a resident's point of view, I see empty boxes, and I wonder, what are you going to fill the boxes in, or are they empty for a purpose? And if all the boxes are the same size, does that mean the priority is the same for each of them? Are they equal in priority? So those are just some things that maybe the average person would not be able to verbalize, but might wonder.
Well, I mean, I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, the table is the limitations of PowerPoint, so we couldn't, if we had more time to really, create a marketing material, I think it would look better. But no, the empty boxes are just because we had to fill in the space, so we can clean that up. But the goal is to have, the 4 strategic focus areas, some components underneath it so the public can understand what they mean and the board knows. And those can change, but that's the whole point of that because, to Mike's point, wellness, well, what is that? That can mean many things. Well, we're trying to define what that is with the components.
Other thoughts? Eric?
So the question I have is, what's the action that you're requesting the board to take on this tonight? I mean, are we supposed to vote on I've got the slide on mission and vision. Are we supposed to vote on this?
We can get to that. So not the mission and vision. We're going to present the proposed mission and vision statements for the board to consider, and then they don't need to make a decision tonight. But you'll really need to take that back and review the wording, and then come back. This is the framework here is important for us to come back in December with a draft plan. So that we want to make sure the board's in alignment and they agree with this, or if there's major, changes you want to make, then we've got to go back to the drawing board a little bit. So just an agreement on this framework.
Mike?
Thumbs up to the framework. I think it's really good.
Yeah, you don't have to take a vote, but we just need a consensus.
I'm hearing, and it sounds like there's consensus, more or less, so hopefully. Eric?
So my only concern, this is not necessarily a vote against, but my only concern is, it seems just a little bit complex. I mean, I would like to see if possible to simplify it just a bit. But beyond that, I've got no other qualms.
I mean, we can try to do that. I think we'll break it down. The goal tonight was really was to walk you through the process again. Some of you had been through it last year, but to see, okay, here's the process, but then also how we got to this point. I think telling that story is important. So, you're heard, the community's been heard. There's been a lot of input. The way the 19 plan was created and the 24 mimicked 19. I don't think this board was happy with kind of that just set up. So we thought this was a much more efficient and effective way to look at the strategic plan as a whole and allows the board to be more nimble in kind of setting course every year.
Mike?
I actually do have a question. Do the green arrows on this have meaning? Like, they're pointing at something specific, or is that just like, hey, in general, that's matrixed across?
All of these emphasis areas flow through everything.
Okay.
Then, great. It's very, the limits of PowerPoint. Yeah.
Eric, is that it? Yeah, Eric.
I think Mike almost proved my point. So I look at it and I think the ideas are all there, but it's, from my eye, it's a little bit complex. So
I mean, there'll be a written draft of the plan that will try to articulate this better, and hopefully that's easier to understand.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Judel.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
So we left you with homework. So, not Judel, the board, the mission and vision. So in the next meeting, it'll be good to have a discussion around that. And what we did was and I'll kind of elaborate on it while we kind of clean up, but we asked the staff to contribute if they wanted to. We had just to get everyone's input. The staff are out there every day. They see the mission and vision on the wall, so they are very familiar with it. We got some really insightful feedback. I was impressed. I wasn't sure what we were going to get. And so we got a number of staff inputs. This SLT reviewed them, and we really didn't even tweak them a whole lot because we didn't want to. We wanted to present them, as they were. So That's what you have, and some, for the most part, they're the staff submittals. You do have an option on there to maintain the existing mission and vision. We thought that was important. Because one thing we did with the staff contest is we had a little survey. We asked them to submit their ideas, but we also asked them, what do you think about the current mission and vision? And they weren't that displeased with the current mission and vision, and they still went through the process of providing one. So I think that's important for the board, too. On a scale of 5, I think it was 3.5 and 3.7, their approval rating for the current mission and vision. So that's kind of important, too. And when we talked to you all about mission and vision, I think the wording was one thing that everyone just kind of got caught up on. I think the messaging between the mission and vision was consistent when we talked about that. And I think you'll see that in what's been proposed. The messaging is consistent. It's just kind of how you want to view it and word it. And that's why it goes back to, in a strategic planning process, the first thing you do is set your mission and vision, and then you have your focus areas. So we're backing into it a little bit, but we're still very consistent. And that's why I added the slide with your current goals, just to show you this is all in alignment. We're really just kind of tweaking and modifying.
Ashley?
I was just curious what the contest prize is if they win.
It was a raffle. It wasn't a win. So because we didn't know if anyone would win at all. So there were gift cards for 3 of the submittals.
That's great.
Nice. All right, well, very good. We'll move on to new business for the overview of villages. I'll just turn it over to Jackie.
Jackie Tuma, yes.
Good evening. Tonight I'll be presenting an overview of the Village Community Association, specifically the funding relationship between CA and the villages. I'm sure you know that CA provides a significant amount of funding and support to the villages and is stewards of the annual charge. It's important to understand that relationship, both from a governance and a financial perspective. I also think that this is very timely and relevant as you are discussing and deciding on CA's FY26 budget and also CA's areas of strategic focus. So I will begin with a brief overview of that governance, village governance structure, and then we will look at the funding framework and then finally go over some financial data, trends, and metrics. This is strictly informational. There's no action that's needed. And if it's okay with you, let's hold questions until the end of the presentation. So we'll go through a quick review of the village structure. Each village is a separate residential community association. They are independent, incorporated, nonprofit civic associations. That's an important distinction. They are not subsidiaries of CA. CA does not have legal right or control over the villages. The villages were formed to promote the common good and welfare of the residents and property owners of each village. They each have unique articles of incorporation, bylaws, and covenants, and they each have community elected boards of directors. So there are 2 key areas of village operations, and we're going to refer back to this in a few slides because it is the foundation of how the annual charge share is derived in total, as well as how it's allocated to each village. So there are the mission-focused operations, one being enforcing covenants. Now, these are architectural and maintenance covenants. CA does not have any of those covenants. These are covenants that belong to the villages, and they are what the village's covenant advisors are working to enforce. The villages, as a mission-focused purpose, they foster a sense of community. This can be through special events, advocacy, communication, resident services, however they so choose and what they choose to focus on, and then also overseeing the village elections. The second area of village operations are the managing CA's 24 buildings. We refer to those as the 10 community centers and the 14 neighborhood centers. And the villages, as you know, generate revenue through leasing and renting those spaces to individuals, to organizations. They are also provided the ability, if they so choose, to offer space at free and reduced rates. to residents and other civic groups. Now, there are two key areas of support and funding that CA provides to the villages. The first one is outlined here, and I refer to it as direct and allocated financial support. So these are going to be the things that you see as the dollars that show up in CA's budget and CA's financial statements on the Village Community Association page. You're probably most familiar with the first one, the annual charge share. This is a grant to each village. And for various reasons, this is the structure that was established decades ago. It is a grant. It's not revenue sharing. It is not a pass-through of funds. And it's not compensation for services. So this is an important distinction, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment. Second, CA funds the employer portion of villages' employee benefits, so that would be health and life insurance, health, medical, dental, life insurance premiums that are typically paid by the employer. CA pays real estate taxes and building insurance. Any legal fees that are incurred for covenant enforcement are paid for by CA, and CA employs a covenant administrator who works closely with each of the village's covenant advisors. CA provides capital improvements to the community and neighborhood center buildings, and incurs most of the costs for repairs and maintenance over a certain threshold, $1,000 to $2,000. Anything below that, the villages pay for. And then there are a series of administrative costs that are covered by CA, and they're pretty significant. You know, the resources to spend to administer and maintain regulatory compliance over the multiple employer 401k plan, as an example, which is fairly complex to include all 11 organizations, procuring commercial insurance, the audits that go along with having that plan, that 401k plan, a number of things, broker fees, all of that is paid for by CA. So the second type of funding is in-kind support. So the most significant by far of those is simply the free use that the villages have of the 24 buildings. So no rent is paid to CA by the villages, and the CA does not receive any of the revenue that's generated either by the villages. The villages retain that. So other in-kind support is that CA maintains the grounds, provides snow, trash, and debris removal, and special event support. So you can see CA's crews out and about in these pictures, some setup or takedown of a special event in Oakland Mills. You've got some trash collection going on in King's Contrivance and some outdoor work here going on in Wild Lake and Town Center. Now, there is a management contract, and that exists between CA and each village, and it's primarily building use agreements that outline a lot of the responsibilities for managing those buildings, you know, insurance requirements, operating hours. It covers maintenance responsibilities, inspections, financial reporting requirements, and that contract is largely the same for all 10 organizations. The current management contract had a 6-year term that ended in FY24. It was extended for 1 year. We're currently in that extension year, and new contracts are underway and are scheduled to take effect next May of 2025, the start of FY26. So the annual charge share grant. We touched on that. That is an important distinction. We refer to it frequently as the annual charge share. So the CA, and of course the CA board particularly, are the fiduciaries of the full annual charge. CA has sole responsibility for assessing, for collecting, for safeguarding the entire annual charge, which is budgeted to be just over $50 million in FY26. So of course with that comes stewardship and oversight of how it is spent. I would say that CA's commitment to significantly funding the village is absolutely clear, but But through that, the funding arrangement that is in place, there are oversight and responsibilities that are important. Oh, I think I want to say more on this slide. Okay, annual charge area. So there are two pieces, two steps in this process. The first one, and it's what you guys are doing over the next couple months, is approving that total grant amount, that annual charge share to the villages. So let's say, I think that it's going to be just about maybe 3.5 million in FY 26, just hypothetically, and that is part of the annual budget process approved by the board. But then how is that $3.5 million allocated to each village? That is done through a formula that has been in place since FY19, and we're going to talk about that for just a minute. So prior to this being in place, starting in FY19, there was a work team with 2 village managers, 2 CA team members from the finance team, who really built up what that total amount was going to be from the ground up. And it was based on historical costs of what each of the villages were spending. As far as staffing, it looked at salary studies. And if you look at this kind of area on the left-hand side here, the intent was to cover virtually all of the cost of the operations that relate to the village's mission. And that was intentional, and it's about 70% of what each village receives because, you know, the villages can't generate very much revenue from those mission-specific functions, right? And then intentionally a smaller portion, about 30%, was built up to defray some of the costs of managing the buildings. The thought was a portion of janitorial, utilities, repairs, and maintenance based on leasable square footage, because, you know, there are costs that the villages are incurring for sure, staffing and these other types of direct utilities, et cetera, but they're also generating revenue that is hopefully at least covering those costs. Back up to the mission-specific coverage, the village manager and operating expenses, which includes D&O insurance, printing, donations, a portion of furniture and fixtures, that is a flat amount that is given to all 10 villages equally. They all start out, they all receive that same amount. With covenant enforcement, it is allocated based on the number of properties that are subject to the annual charge. And then for communication and special events, that amount is allocated based on population of each village. So hopefully that helps to kind of see that methodology. Two points that I'll make on this slide. This is the foundation for which each village gets. How each village chooses to spend that money is up to them. That there's no requirement to spend it, you know, in accordance with these areas and keep within those constraints. The other thing that I would say is that, you know, there is another piece to this, which is that ultimately what each village can provide to its community, to its resident, is impacted by the revenue that's generated by the villages, and each ability to generate that revenue is not equal, right? Buildings are different. Some have 4, some have 1. They all have different pros and cons to them, and so, you know, that's a piece to the puzzle for sure, and I wanted to mention that. So let's talk for a minute about excess cash reserves and how that factors into this whole funding arrangement. I'm sure you know, CA gives money to the villages. Sometimes the villages pay some of the money back. What does all of that look like? So I want to try to clarify here because I think that sometimes there's some confusion. Well, how could it be possible that the villages have certain levels of cash? They can only keep 20%, so let's get that kind of straightened out. So first of all, CA does not require the villages to retain any certain minimum level of cash reserves. That's up to each village, its boards, as far as what any minimum cash balance would be. But there is an annual retrospective look at whether the cash at the end of the year, if it far exceeds upcoming needs, then it is considered excess cash reserves that comes back to CA. And of course, bless you, any excess cash that's returned just covers, a portion of this other funding that CA provides. So I'm going to give you like an example that will hopefully help to know what that looks like. We're going to walk through a quick example. This is a hypothetical here. Okay, so on the right-hand side here, let's say in FY24, the operating expenses for a village was $400,000. 20% of that is $80,000, which is that cap, okay? There's the cap of, reserves, excess cash reserves. Over on the left-hand side here, you see at the end of the year, they had this hypothetical $200,000 in the bank. That is not what is compared to the cap. There are adjustments made off of that amount because there are bills to pay and there are security deposits that are part of that. There's deferred revenue. There are other levels of reserves that the villages can keep. For example, they each have $30,000 of contingency funds that had been dispersed a number of years ago. So all of those things are subtracted out, and then there is a reduced number, and that is the cash that is subjected to the cap. So in this example, 90,000, the cap that is compared to 80,000. So in this scenario, there would be excess cash reserves of $10,000 that would come back to CA. This is not unusual. You can see adjustments here that are more than half of the cash balance. There are so many exclusions from the cash that's subject to the cap. In FY24, 70% of cash in total was excluded from the calculation. And there was actually very little excess cash reserves after that. So I'm hopeful that that kind of helps to understand cash in the bank versus what's coming back to CA. All right, so let's look at a few numbers and a few trends, and then I'll be done. So the entire donut here in FY24 is the $47.8 million of annual charge share, and you can see here $6.2 million, or 13% of that, went to the villages for all of that direct and allocated support that we talked about. That's on the Village Communities Association's page of the financial reports. This does not include the in-kind support that we talked about. So this is, on a GAAP basis and just kind of gives a bird's eye view. So that 6.2 is right here in FY24, and you can just see kind of a 10-year, pretty consistent funding here, the amounts every year. All right, so cash is king, and villages are primarily a cash in, cash out business, so we're going to focus here on cash positions and some other related metrics. So total cash at the end of the year, you can see the flow from FY19. It edges up during the COVID years and has kind of come down in the last couple of years. What I like to look at here is the far left, which is FY19. There's our pre-pandemic baseline of $2.9 million total in cash, and then the most recent fiscal year end, it was at just under $3.3 million in cash. There was kind of a whole lot going on here with trying to adjust and make sure that the villages had what they need while things were, largely reduced or no operations. So then we talked about excess cash reserves, and you can see here in this graph, and you're going to get a copy of this presentation to drill into it more, but you can see during those same years the reserves that came back. Now this blue line, if we just use the calculation that I went through, is the amount that would be coming back every year since FY19. But during COVID, the board passed resolutions to say, well, let's not have them pay all of that money back. What if they need it? That created a bit of a buildup in cash because while the villages weren't generating nearly as much revenue through the buildings, they also didn't have the associated costs with that. And fortunately, they don't have very many fixed costs, like namely rent. So it kind of corrected in these last couple of years. These 2 years, the most recent 2 years, FY23 and 24, the difference between what was calculated and what was paid had nothing to do with the pandemic. This is only Longreach, who got a 2-year exception for some of their cash reserves to hold on to more because of the Stonehouse renovation. So a few other interesting metrics. So overall, 62% of Village's total revenue comes from CA. Flip side, Village generated revenue is about 38% of their total revenue. Total cash as of the end of FY24 represents 6.9 months of Village's expenses. And then if we were to just back out from that, if you look at this third circle here, if you were to back out their obligations, you know, we talked about there are bills to pay. There's cash that they receive for services that have not been rendered yet, right? That's their deferred revenue. The annual charge shares for, on a quarterly basis is paid in advance. If you back all of that out, then it's about 3.1 months of expenses that are on hand. And that kind of translates well into working capital, which is a financial metric that you're probably more familiar with, that measures whether an organization has funds that are readily available to cover liabilities over the next year. So it's a simple calculation of current assets divided by current liabilities, and what you want to see is a number over 1, you know, to show that there is not a struggle to meet short-term needs. So you can see here 1.8 was the average. And I have one more slide. You know, there's so many different ways you can look at the numbers, but what I also find interesting is if we think about the Village generated revenue, so not the annual charge share, but what the Village is, that 38%. I like taking a look at that pre-pandemic baseline year and what's the delta between that and our most recent year, just kind of that new normal. So just taking Dorsey Search at the top as an example, what we're saying here is that Dorsey Search generated 21% more revenue in FY24 than it did in FY19. There's an anomaly here, though, and it's Longreach, because FY24 Longreach's revenue was significantly impacted by the Stonehouse construction. So if you were to say, well, how were they in 23? They were relatively flat. They were similar to King's Contrivance, where FY pre-pandemic and the new normal, the revenue was generated essentially at around the same amount. So if you were to take that outlier out, FY19 versus FY24, it's pretty flat overall. There's like a, I think it was a 2% increase in revenue generation compared to pre-pandemic. So I will make sure to send each of you the presentation, because if you want to drill into those numbers, I have some attachments. We talked about the 6.2 million and the breakdown of what's, you know, that direct and those direct and allocated costs. I also have side by side all 10 villages, revenue and expenses that you can see, and then a lot of those metrics that I was showing, the details behind that by village, you can see in a slide as well. So you will receive that. And with that, are there any questions?
Eric.
So I'm looking at the budget, and I see that the annual charge share line for the village community associations is going up from, looks like 3.679 to 3.725, or an increase of about 1%. So the question I have is, how is that number computed? How did we arrive at increasing the village annual charge share by 49K? Budget over budget.
It's actually going up over what they were paid by a higher percent than that, Eric. It's closer to a little over 3%, but FY25 was inflated because of the fact that we made an adjustment to Longreach's payment that went back, and
was increased to FY '25 annual charge. But that was just the excess cash impact. It wasn't what was actually paid to each village.
So again, when we have the number 3.725 million in the budget for the annual charge share, how do we arrive at that number?
Do you want me to take it?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So in FY '19, there was that buildup, right? It was built up from scratch, looking at covering the mission specific and then covering defraying a portion of the building management costs that we talked about. Since then, it's been that percentage increase year over year, starting with that foundation in FY '19.
So, so what's the percentage?
Roughly 3%? It's a little over 3% this year, yeah.
So it's 3%. So that's slightly under the annual charge share increase each year.
No, actually, for FY '26, I think it's a little bit over what we're expecting after the abatements and everything.
Right, the goal is to help, is a long-term view of inflationary increases, just like we have with our expenses. That's been the process, assumption for the 26 years that I've been here. It hasn't been related to the annual charge revenue growth or decrease or.
So if I were to look at River Hills annual charge share, because those slides flipped way too fast for me, I would expect to see a 3% increase from last year.
Yes.
Okay.
Mike, I had you in the queue. No, Susan, did you want to?
No, I just want to make sure that, so the information that you have so far doesn't show the detail, doesn't show the annual charge grant by itself. That's a net number, so that number is net of, that also includes like the benefits reimbursement. There's some other things in there. So when the draft budget is produced in January, and you can look back at last year's, there's an exhibit in the budget that shows just the grant amount. So that should be clearer as we get through this process. Right, it's not in there now. So.
Just checking.
Mike, I had you next.
The 6.2 million that you had on the pie chart, that's just operational funding that wouldn't include like capital investments in village facilities, right?
Correct, so it's got depreciation.
Right, okay. And then I'm just gonna throw this out there because for Owen Brown, that neither here nor there really, but man, that delta, when I was the chair, that always, that got me, because that delta for our negative delta is a result of CA no longer hosting a summer camp in our village center during the summer and paying us rent, which is kind of a wacky way that CA was paying us rent anyways. But that is that delta, and my village manager would be mad at me if I didn't highlight that.
Ashley?
Great. So I was wondering, are villages able to invest excess cash to establish an emergency fund? I briefly saw numbers. It looks like they don't have a large emergency fund established. So hypothetically, if something like COVID were to happen again and they need to pay the staff, right, will that come from Columbia Association's emergency fund? How would that work?
So they have cash reserves. They have a disbanding of the contingency fund that was supposed to be for unexpected or emergencies, and they each have that, and that's excluded from the excess cash calculation of funds that come back to CA. And then they've got the 20% reserve, and then we exclude every upcoming payable that they have, whether it's short-term or long-term. So that inherently allows them, each village, to retain a healthy amount of reserves. Now, whether the villages do that is up to each village and its boards.
Okay, is there a limit to how much they can put into the reserve?
Well, if it becomes so much that it creates this excess cash through that calculation that I showed, then yes, it would come back, right? Because, the challenge is granting the money, but then it wasn't the right amount. And so that's intended to say if it's far exceeding what it appears is needed, then it would only then would it come back.
Okay.
Sky?
Stupid question. If I'm a village and I can keep $20,000 this year. I can hide it and keep an additional $20,000 next year, and at the end of 5 years, I have $100,000?
No.
Okay, I'm just hoping.
Is somebody trying to do that, Sky? Don't tell the auditor that.
Take the fifth, Scott.
So I shouldn't ask where funds are getting hidden over there. So this is more of a philosophical, it's not really a question, but so we've talked a lot about the cap, the amount of money that the villages are allowed to hold in reserve, and if they have extra, then that's got to be returned to CA. I think philosophically, the question I have is why don't we apply the same principle to us? If we have excess cash, whatever we define that as, why shouldn't that be returned to our residents? Because at the end of the day, all this money is coming from our residents. It flows through us, it goes, and from us it flows to the villages. But if we've got, basically he's telling the villages that, okay, you can hold this much cash, and beyond that, you've got too much, you don't need it anymore. You don't need that extra cash beyond this. I think the same principle should hold to us, that after a certain point, we might have too much cash, and that should be we either use it for the benefit of the residents or return it.
I think I can speak to some of that. I think for the villages, CA, the larger CA, pays for their capital. It covers a lot of the costs for the villages. So where what they don't spend, they maintain there, but they're not doing large capital improvements that CA is doing. So when we have excess cash, we're putting that towards either short or long-term capital. So the villages don't have to do that. So it's kind of a different formula altogether.
I just want to quickly tap onto that I would caution comparing what the villages may need and what would be considered excess to what CA would need. So it's capital, it's debt service, it's contingent, you can see it in the emergency cash reserves risk-based approach of where we need to be to prepare for the unexpected. And it's just apples and oranges to the exposure that the villages have.
And I'm not saying that we apply the exact same formula. Obviously, we have debt. I don't believe any of the villages have debt. We have a lot more facilities. I don't believe any village actually owns a facility. So obviously there's apples and oranges, but I think the concept is still the same. If the villages are basically said, if we basically are telling the villages that you can hold this much cash and beyond that you don't really need it anymore, I think the same principle should apply to us. I mean, obviously it would probably be a different formula, but at what point do we have too much cash? And I think that's a philosophical question that we're not going to answer tonight, but it's something that I think we should think about.
Mike, you're good. No. Other thoughts?
There's no vote or anything. It's just...
Okay. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to questions only. Sean, anything here?
Not too much. Just the president report is in your packet. If there's any questions on that, but another successful month.
Okay. Anything for Sean?
John, no legislative updates, I don't think.
No, we have the one bill related to the Long Reach that the county council is going to consider on having a hearing next week. Just yesterday, we got word, and it's obviously too late to include in the packet, related to some state legislation that came out. There is, so we started to look at those bills, and obviously we just got it yesterday. We couldn't include it last week in the packet. I will say that one of the bills that is coming up is the same bill that we talked about last year with Delegate Hill. She's introducing the same bill again. And from my review, it's in exactly the same form that had some input in, and so I think we don't necessarily have a problem with the way it turned out. There's another bill that Senator Lamb is going to introduce that we're looking at. There's a hearing with the county delegation on those bills at the end of the month. So we'll be looking at those beforehand. And the hearing at the end of the month is basically for public input, and then after that, the delegation will decide whether they want to support the bills or not. So that's where we are.
Reg?
Yeah, John, quick question here. You mentioned Long Reach at the county council. What were they planning on doing?
That's for the redevelopment of the Long Reach Village Center.
Right.
That the county bid out, and they got one proposal back.
Yep.
They submitted the proposal, and it's a vote on that.
Or whether to accept it or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Karen?
Yeah, John, Terry's Hills bill, is that the one just that is to inform residents that they have rights?
Yeah, that's the one that landlords would have to furnish copies of the documents and which village they're in and the covenants, et cetera. So
She changed that bill last year, didn't she? Did she slimmed it down, or she did something to it? It wasn't exactly the same, or she withdrew it, and I'm trying to remember whether we supported it or not, CA as an entity.
I don't think we took an official position. I mean, we didn't oppose it. I will say that, Terry was very accommodating. I met with her, and I think that the final form that was voted on, that didn't pass, although the delegation, I think, pushed it forward, but it never went to a vote before the whole legislature. We were comfortable with, so.
Okay, yeah, after hearing from the tenants and some of the things that the board member from Walled Lake said, where she didn't have any information, that just seemed like a good bill for us to support.
Yeah, I would say that the burden there's nothing that CA has to do. So, I mean, there's nothing we can do. It's all on the landlords to do something. I mean, we don't.
It seems like a win.
We're fine if they want to do that,
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
Oh, yes. And what was the content of the other bill, Senator Lamb's bill?
That involves some changes to HOA Act procedures, and we're studying that now. I don't want to get into too many of the specifics. Preliminary view is it may not directly affect us, but it's a little more complicated than the Terry Hill bill, so it's going to take a little more time. Matter of fact, we're going to have a meeting on it next week, so we'll go through it.
Eric? Okay. Other questions? All right, Bill didn't leave me with any chair's remarks, so is there a motion to adjourn?
You might want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, that. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And is there a second?
Yes.
Ashley, do we have unanimous consent? Great. So adjourned.
No objection.